In order at 8:34.
Recording pending.
Well
I don't know why it's
done.
saying recording pending.
Yes.
There we go.
Welcome, everybody, to our second meeting in a jam-packed small room. Roll call. Christine, roll call?
Just make sure everybody's here and we'll record it.
I'll just, for the record, note all board members are in attendance, plus staff, Rob and Christine. We don't have any other meeting ground rules to discuss unless anybody has anything they want to bring up. Okay, that brings us to approval of the minutes. We have draft minutes that were circulated by Christine on Monday, the 9th. I'll take a motion to approve.
Moved.
Second?
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes approved.
I would like to note that to me, it would be helpful if it wasn't by the minute, organized by the minutes or a chronology, but rather a topic. Subheader, this goes 10:01, 10:05, 10:15. If you ever needed to review minutes, it would be much easier if there was subject matter that tracked with the agenda.
Yeah, I'll see.
That'd be great.
Who's the minute?
I'm filling in for now, so I'm trying to
Okay.
figure
Oh
out.
dear. Okay, sorry,
Let me get
Christine.
an administrative assistant.
Yeah, we'll
I'll
deal with
try
it then.
I'll try
We'll deal with it then.
I'm having a hard time just even keeping track of the times.
I never got the minutes for some reason, so if we could check email distribution list.
Okay.
We're asking people to wear masks in here.
I didn't bring one.
Then
we'll
we're gonna
get you
ask you,
one.
yeah, we
It's
have one.
very
Yeah.
unsafe for you to be here.
Yeah. Hold on a second, Steve.
BB Otley,
Fresh one.
last night.
That was last night.
Yes, there's another meeting in Gateway,
Yesterday
so
afternoon.
we're in here.
Was it attached to the revised agenda or something?
252.
I also want to make sure my email address,
Laura Sibilia at me.
no, that just goes to my phone.
Oh, what's your email address?
Can you send it to my legislative address?
Sure.
Good
Would it be
move.
helpful if I pull the draft minutes up on the screen? Oh, we already approved. Oh, yeah, we already,
Yeah,
okay.
I think, yeah, we're fine.
Okay.
Because I think we're going to focus our discussion
Yeah.
really here. So the only other thing before we move into staffing discussion and presentation, we will add to standing item on all agendas an executive session, just in case we need to go into executive session.
Okay.
But we can leave it open as, like, for some of the entities that I've worked for, you just have a standing executive session, no time certain.
All right, sure. So, okay, who moved to support?
I did.
You motioned, okay, Holly motioned. Who seconded?
I did, Dan.
Okay, thank you.
It's hard to participate and take notes at the same time.
Yeah, terrible.
So what you're saying is possible executive session, just put that generally at the top of the agenda.
I would put it last.
Put it last, okay.
So like at our organization, we have a standing executive session at the top with
Oh, you
no
do?
time certain, but we don't go into it at the very beginning of the meeting. It leaves notice that there potentially could be an executive session.
Okay,
And you can even put, behind it to be determined or anything like that. So it's not people aren't feeling like there's going to be some private discussion happening. Okay. All right. So we can move on now to
Did
staffing.
we get an approval of the agenda? Did I miss that?
We can take action on the agenda.
Okay,
Shall we? All right. Let's follow the agenda as you've laid out. Let's come back to the item 1, agenda changes and request. Does anybody have any discussion on the agenda?
I would like to propose that we do go into executive session on the staffing discussion.
yeah, we don't, from an organization design standpoint, we should probably do that publicly.
I'm not talking about organization design issues when I'm thinking about this staffing issue, though. I didn't know that it was narrow to that point only as an agenda item.
Yeah, I'm just saying, why don't we cross that bridge when we get there? When we get into point being, this is not, I don't expect this to be in executive session.
Neither do I.
So what we can do is if there are any personnel matters that are specific to a person or potentially could cause concern in terms of a human resource related matter, we'll discuss if that subject warrants going into executive session, but if it's a general discussion, we'll keep it in open session.
Right.
And the thumb will be on the scale to keep everything in open session.
And I'm
Contract
just
matters,
letting you know that I would like to have the opportunity to consider going to executive session in a staffing discussion today.
absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. All right, going back to the minutes, I'm sorry, the agenda. We have a motion to approve the agenda. Second? Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Agenda passes. Okay, now we are into staffing discussions. Christine, I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, so what I've done is, the first page of this is the staffing discussion. I'll take that, sure, take one.
I can share that for everybody else. There we go.
So, Rob and I have been having discussions, I've been having discussions with June Tierney and her staff about delineation of responsibilities. And what you're seeing by this slide here is kind of a assimilation of all the thoughts and ideas. So, you know, one of the things that we talked about, I'm not sure where this comes from, but when it comes to grant administration, when I say administration, I'm referring to Scott's administration, they're taking full responsibility for ensuring that all grants in the state comply with the ARPA requirements. So there's a chain that kind of goes from federal requirements to state requirements through the DPS to us. So June's group plans on continuing to take responsibility for the regulatory side of grant administration.
You would have to explain what a regulatory side of grant administration means.
I'm glad you asked that question, thank you. Right, that gets into the real discussion is, right, there's a level of discipline that the administrator wants to ensure that these grants follow. So, and maybe you're more, since you were helping write the bill, the position statement is that, hey, if we didn't want regulatory oversight, it wouldn't have been housed under the DPS.
I don't believe that we're housed under the DPS except for the fact that we happen to share a facility that is allocated by the DPS. There is nothing about this group that is under the DPS.
But this role is part of the DPS, right?
You're an employee of the DPS, but the governor appoints the executive director, and then this board can decide to dismiss that executive director and hire another one. There is no oversight by the commissioner of this group, this in particular person. I see no basis in the legislation to say that we are under the DPS. I don't know if you have some comments.
I don't, but my question is, with regard to grants, to the grant management and grant reporting. So what is the experience of the CUD?
I don't think, I would say that.
So we make a decision,
Well,
or I guess we're determining that, right?
yeah, the experience of the CUDs, I think,
We have
is.
to sort through this. We have to pull this spaghetti pile apart.
Yeah,
Make
that's a good
sense of the
point.
noodles.
That's my interest.
Your question is, you know, I think you've got a really good question there as well. At the point, I don't think the CUDs, and I certainly won't say that I have, we had a grant administrator at EPC. We did about $35 million in grants in 5 years. So they had some experience, but the ARPA, the ARPA requirements, all grant requirements, it's fairly straightforward. You analyze the grant and you do the reporting according to what the grant says, right? I don't think that all said, when you say how much experience, it's a judgment call. I would say that the CUDs have limited experience. What would you say, Rob?
It's the wrong question. I think I'm being misunderstood.
Okay.
So my point will be, and the place that I want to start from is, how do the CUDs experience this process? That's the place that I want to start from. So
Help me with that. I didn't understand.
So, who are they, where's the application for the grant funding going to? We make the determination and then, but how is the communication going back and forth? And then my bias will be towards simplicity as well as good government and accountability for that.
Well, maybe it would be helpful if I give what's happening now versus what we may be envisioning happening. There's still a lot of unanswered questions that we're seeking some clarification on. So what has been happening prior to the creation of the VCBB is that an RFP is issued by the state, by the department, to all the different possible applicants. In the case of the pre-construction loans in 315, that was just communication union districts and their partners. They submit an application. That application is reviewed by staff, and a recommendation was made to the director of telecom and the commissioner. Then the grant was awarded, was announced. There's a whole other step after that in terms of developing the grant agreement, which we went through a process with the lawyers to make sure we had a strong grant agreement that took into account all the federal and state guidelines, the ARPA funds. They're challenging. There's a lot of different rules that have to be followed. That has been a challenge for me in explaining to the CUDs. That's not my official background in grant management. It's been a challenge for them understanding that. Once the way the grant agreement is executed is it was routed through the public service department, through the admin department, and then sent through, not SharePoint, one sign to the CUDs to sign off. And then the final signature came from the commissioner. Then they have to submit an invoice and any other steps in between within the grant agreement. So it is quite the process. What I'm still unclear about is what role the department is going to play in this new process going forward. A lot of those steps aren't optional. It may be a question of who's going to do what. When it comes to writing the grant agreement, for instance, that might be something that is a combination. When it comes to actually routing it through OneSpan, that's something that's more technical in nature.
What is OneSpan?
Just to get the signatures, to entering all the data into the state grant tracking systems. That's something that, that's something that's not where there is like qualitative changes being made or anything. It's getting things done, getting the signatures done, making sure everything is there that needs to be.
Okay, but the person signing these grant agreements is Christine as executive director.
That is my understanding.
The group approving these, I'm just following legislation here. The group approving these grant agreements is this board. The form of document, which includes the ARPA, I've read the grant agreement that went to NEK as a CUD. It's got all kinds of errors in it, but it does have a section that distills ARPA requirements and lists them. So as long as you have that format approved for the boilerplate, there isn't a lot. I mean, it's just like the Attorney General's office puts out a boilerplate of set of terms that has to go into the grant agreement. You don't want to bother negotiating with that. It's more pain than it's worth, although it's a pretty direct problem for private enterprise to comply with some of those state requirements. Okay.
One thing I have to put out there is we are not, if it's attachment C, we are not, that is set by the state as a whole. That is not something that is set by DPS, and that is a requirement.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's these are boilerplate terms. So we don't need review of those for every grant agreement. we just need to comply with the set of terms. So I still ask you the question, what's the role of the DPS and what's regulatory review?
Yeah, and that's why I think this is such an important deliberation, because we're also going to be, all of the CUDs and us will be required for a single audit, for public government single audit. I've talked to, I've talked to Doug Hopper's office, and, he plans on randomly auditing some of the CUDs over time, which I think that's all checks and balances. So the question becomes, I really want to get a process flow diagram here. We don't need to do that today, but that's our decision. The outcome should be, what's the process flow diagram? Does it stop here with our board, or does it continue to flow to the DPS and then to the administration?
For review, you mean, and approval?
Yes, yeah.
Why would the legislature bother creating this organization?
The funds have to come from, no, the funds are
The funds sit here,
at the department.
yes.
Funds are at the department. So the fund has been established at the department.
That's my way. I read it.
Yeah.
But we allocate it.
Yes.
That's, yep, I'm with you.
Yes.
Yeah. So to the extent that the department needs to reconcile the fund balance sheet, because that keeps it connected to the state budgeting process. I see it, right? I see that. But that it is an administrative check at best.
When it comes to the content, I believe that stays with the board and at the board recommendations, but that is something where there may need to be some clarification or reiterating a board's position.
By whom?
I think we just go with the way we interpret it, and somebody wants to challenge us on it, that's great. Right?
Yeah. That's what I think.
Christine, this conversation makes me think we should have a presentation done, maybe by a lawyer, regarding this. What is the role of the PSD in this process? And I'm just looking at staffing wise, are we planning to review every grant? Are we going to be doing,
Yeah, I think that's why we're here.
we're digging in? What is the administrative support that we have through the PSD? Because I think we are going to need some. We are going to be, we're going to need help.
That's why we're having.
I think that's why we're
I know,
Lead into this.
but as we start to build this, we start pulling apart the onion and we see the details of it. I think some legal guidance going through the legislation would help.
Yeah, so that's why you see in the VCB staff a legal component. With that lawyer comes a question of, do we hire a full-time lawyer, which is the DPS's interpretation, or do we contract for legal services?
This is why I was going to request executive session, because I have an answer for you.
Okay.
Unless it's a particular person, I'm going to
And it
suggest
is.
we stay in
And it
public
is.
session.
And it is contract negotiation as well.
Okay.
But I would just want to have at least buy-in of the board, and then we can be public about what we were doing or not doing.
Mhm. So at this point, we're talking about whether we need,
So I think that we're
person
getting
or-
confused here, though, because the question on the table was, to your point, legislative interpretation.
Mhm.
For my money, we would invite Maria Royale, who was on staff council during the creation of the bill, in, and we would ask questions. And she would say, well, it was my direction to do this, or I thought we drafted it so it would do that. She could give us a real-time feedback from both chambers, which is useful.
I agree. I think that would be really helpful to have the Edge Council come in and do that presentation. And we have a different discussion about our legal expertise.
In our staffing.
For our
needs.
staffing, exactly. That's a different discussion.
Yeah. So focusing right now is, what do we want the process to be for the grants? And what I'd like to do is bring that process flow diagram into a meeting for your approval, so that put your blessing on it to make sure we've interpreted it correctly. But what I hear you say is that you believe the role of the DPS is really to reconcile the funds between the grants that we approve and the ARPA funds. Is that what I hear?
I think the board asked to have ledge counsel.
Okay, so we'll have ledge counsel come in and then we'll define the
Exactly.
process flow.
We can all interpret it in our own way, but I think it would be helpful to have that grounding discussion.
Okay, so we'll bring ledge counsel in future meeting.
And is that,
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 3 steps, right? I think the high level responsibilities are, we need to gather together and make public all the grant funding opportunities there are, and that will change over time, hopefully, right? So make that public in one place, make that publicly aware and what's available and what we're overseeing. The second step is, what's the process that you can apply to gain access to those funds? Fully transparent, that's the process flow Christine is talking about, and we're the administrators, or Christine's the administrator of that process flow. We're involved in the review of it. And then the third thing is after funds have been awarded, to have transparency on what's been awarded, the content of the award, and then tracking the performance of the award against the reality on the ground, because we have to reconcile those, because we're not going to waste money.
I think that is a great summarization
Yeah.
of our next
Right.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my understanding is that it's like we deal with all that side of things, deciding what to approve.
Yes,
And in terms of getting the grant agreement out, getting the funds out,
yes.
and accounting for those funds, that more stays with the department. So anything that's subjective is with us.
Right. The thing, I mean,
except for grant performance is not with the
The
department.
grant of performance is not, no.
Okay.
And that, I think, is where we are looking at having some financing grant admin support within our staff here as to be able to deal with that side of things in terms of reviewing contracts, going through any contract review process, of accepting the reports, of being that point person. This comes down to where it's, for the past few months, I've been wearing about 1,000 hats. And I think I've been doing a darn good job, but there's a few things that are not.
Nobody disagrees with that.
There's a few things that are not where I'm the expert on and where they need dedicated
yeah,
support.
and this is
So
where we
that's
start
where-
getting that help.
Exactly.
Absolutely, absolutely. But in my experience, so I did this 5 years ago, I did this on the healthcare side, where we were administering healthcare innovation grant money. The biggest thing we're going to get challenged on is, what is the criteria that you are judging the
That's right.
grant applications against, and are you being consistent and transparent in the application of that criteria on the awards, on your decision-making for the awards? That is where we got wrapped around the axle about 1,000 times, because we never said, we never had a nice, clean, black and white, here are the criteria, and everyone will be assessed on these. So it was all infighting, and you're favoring them versus us.
One thing that will be useful is later on in the agenda, we are actually going through a draft RFP for the pre-construction program. The construction program is going to take a lot more discussion, but this will help you see of what's in an RFP and how we lay all that out. to make
And
decisions.
how you're interpreting the grant requirements.
Yes.
But that's an RFP you're issuing out. That's not incoming grant applications for monies that we are responsible to distribute, right?
No, this would be, in state government, they seem to call that issuing an RFP, but it's issuing the grant, it's issuing the request for applications for the grant program.
Okay.
So that's where the criteria would be listed and about determine like how we're going to judge those applications.
Great, thanks.
I do think that there's a policy decision that comes before all of that process of specific RFP requirements for pre-construction and construction. And that's to get straight some of our interpretation of our role as an aggregator, as a partnership facilitator, as the state plan administrator. Are there things that happen at the umbrella level that then sets up grant criteria?
When you say umbrella level, oh, sorry.
There are criteria in the legislation.
There are, and I think we can't just slide right to the allocation of funds without considering some of those roles.
So when you talk about the umbrella level, that would be this board.
Yes,
So since we're going to be speaking about later in the agenda, I feel like we may have moved away from the staffing discussion.
Yeah, so there's, you really had some good debate around some of the issues that we were struggling with. I mean, I think the GIS professional, there probably shouldn't be any debate there. It's not a technical application.
And do you, why, and I see this as a question, when it says shared, I see this as a question of the best resource may not be an employee.
I think where we have examples of potential shared resources, that is something we will determine whether it's an employee, whether it's contract or otherwise.
So just on the GIS one, I would recommend against hiring a full-time dedicated GIS professional, and I would strongly recommend we figure out how to leverage existing GIS talent, both at the state and the private sector, to get what we want.
Yeah, the state, we aren't going to get it from the state level. I've had a lot of deliberation on that because of the load that they have, but he certainly has some strong local resources.
Yeah,
There-
but I'm gonna make a prejudgment, and so I reserve the right to be wrong later, but I'm not gonna, it'll be a hard sell on me to hire a full-time GIS person to serve this board. That's
And why?
Well, it's not sort
Just to flesh out your thought here before we move on.
just because that is, Dan, back me up on this one, buddy. That is an available skill set that we have adjacent interest with, whether it's in the utility sector or some of the other private companies that, green energy companies. There's a bunch of organizations that I know would love to collaborate with us on this and provide out of the box skill set, technology, and data that all aligns with what we're trying to do. This should not be a high.
Right, so just for clarity though, the need for that function is there. We just don't need to hire it. I don't think we need to hire it per se, because it exists at a lot of different companies, and we just need to allocate the time to this. And so to get it, to get that resource and apply it, perhaps almost full time here, I think is important, but to hire it full time, there's a lot of risk in doing that because there's tools set up and integration.
It's a vital skill set. Fully agree. Vital function.
And we're not saying, just to put a cherry on top, we're not saying that we don't need a central repository and standard bearer for the data that this board uses. We do.
Yes.
You agree.
Yes.
And so it's really about getting an RFP.
Okay,
And
Laura had a comment before.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
so I just want to confirm what I heard, which was there are no state GIS resources available for contracting for this board.
Not in the level that we need. If we what we're doing is we're providing this service to the CUDs. Each CUD needs to do analysis based on route design and all that. So they need, instead of each CUD hiring the GIS professional, we centralize it,
Right.
keep the data centralized. There is no state resources available to do that. In fact, we had a strong discussion about keeping a firewall between the DPS data and our data, because some of the DPS data is confidential. So that trying to split that confidentiality makes it difficult. We're going to have different applications for the use of this information.
So we're really talking about carrier data, ISP data?
Well, that's a subset of the fact that what we're looking for is far more than what, right now there's a shared resource. And you should know that I've been doing this myself with the CUDs. I certainly don't plan on doing it in this position, but there's a lot of work there in terms of GIS, and it's more work than the department can handle. That's the highest level issue.
Yeah, and just backing that up a little bit more, it's also we have it up here twice. One is for the GIS stuff that the board will be doing. We also wanted to have as a shared resource GIS tools and licenses for all the CUDs. That's one area where every CUD doesn't need to be doing it. It's better to have a single place. So it's going to be quite the contract or a full-time position. I know previous to VCBB, I'm working for the department and very closely with their GIS person. Their GIS person wears about 1,000 other hats too. And it's stretched to the limit and been incredibly helpful, but it's something where we need to have our own GIS resources and as soon as possible, frankly.
So I'm glad you made that point, Rob, really good point. I think we need to be very deliberate about separating, are we looking at resources that are dedicated to serving the mission of this board? Versus are we looking at resources to help supplement the competencies of the CUDs? Because those, they can be shared resource, but they need to be chartered separately. So I would say on this top left, right, the way I read that, this is just my interpretation, my first impression of it. The DPS is responsible for the E911 database, right?
Yeah.
And that is good. And we said last time we met, and if this has changed, please let me know.
Yeah, it's not, there's a separate E911 board and VCGI deals with that, but.
Yeah, I'm just talking about, we
The
said,
broadband availability data.
yeah, we said the DPS is gonna be the source of truth for that. We're gonna rely on that, and that's, we're not gonna allow competing sources of truth to be developed, right?
Correct.
So that's what that GIS position or skill set needs to own. I think that's a DPS function, and that is something that the DPS in collaboration with this board have to make sure that we have the resource and that they're chartered properly in addition to whatever else they're doing. You're looking at me funny.
I'm just saying, they don't have the resource to provide the additional support or even a lot of the support that I can be pretty demanding. And I've been pretty demanding on making sure I
So
get the
how
support that
have
we
they
need.
how have they kept the list of locations up to date so far?
They have a GIS person that does that as long as one of their other tasks. But as the board, there's going to be a lot of other GIS.
Not the CUD
Stuff.
stuff.
No,
the
even-
CUD
No,
stuff.
but even
for
for
us
this
as
meeting,
the
I had to
board.
do GIS analysis. Because, when you look at
Off of that data,
off of that data, yeah, you'd have to take the data and then analyze it by, in fact, by broadband status, by CUD.
it's all in there. I've seen that data.
Yeah,
It
but
needs to
somebody's
be
got,
updated.
somebody's got to compile it, and we're not going to ask the department to do that. Because,
Well,
That's
think we
their-
should.
that's
The
their
department
responsibility.
is-
That's their
Yeah,
responsibility.
well,
Wait,
all right,
this
you
is
can,
silly.
but you
the
won't get your
department-
data on time, because there's long delays between request and response. And I'm fine with that, as long as you're fine with that.
I think we need to, can I unpack this real quick? I think we're not talking about, we don't want to do another data set of the broadband availability. As we start having projects, we need the GIS skills to be able to evaluate those projects. That is where the GIS skills that's with our staff comes in. We're not talking about creating a whole new data set. We don't want to go there. It's a months-long process. The new GIS data, the new broadband availability data won't be available till October at the soonest on the state level. That's not what we're going to take on. This is more for being able to take that data, take other data, synthesize it together so we can make good decisions and have that in-house is what the
On
proposal
project
was.
designs, or like routing, or is that what you're talking about?
Those types of things.
Yeah, and for example, one of the things we're looking at, you'll see later on the presentation, is percentage of unserved by CUD, right? Yeah, so, I can run that analysis on my QGIS Linux database, but I'd rather call someone and say, can you give me this and have it within a half hour or so.
Christine, you said something about, I believe everything here is going to be public record. You said something about some of this data might be sensitive.
Not the data we're using. We're going to use all public data.
Okay.
We don't need it. I don't even want the sensitive data. I want to be able to do everything here
Okay.
based on public data.
I'd like you to tell us categorically, though, what the sensitive data you won't be using is.
And that's a debate I don't want to get into, but we can hire a lawyer for that one. But the issue I'm told is
Should
that
be including part of this.
the cable,
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's your S?
No, I know there's
One at a time. Go ahead, Holly.
So I'm thinking that this is labeled staff, and your question is, will we need professional GIS services? And I hear lots of
On
yes.
staff. On staff, you mean?
Well, I consider staff to be by contract,
Okay, great. Oh, great.
yeah, we do too, by the way.
yeah, or by employee.
Okay.
But if you want us to vote right now, whether it's an employer or a contractor, okay. But there's also a conversation that's inherent in what's going on. That's about the topic at 11:30, baseline data presentation. Because we're really talking about what your baseline data will be, where it comes from, who houses it, and how we get it.
I think we've been jumping around a lot on different things, and we're going to touch on all this later. I also do know, looking at the agenda, I know at 9:30 we were going to have updates from the CUDs, and I know one of them, DB Fiber, has a very short period of time and would need to present first. So I don't know
Oh,
how we want to switch things. or if we
we've
want to switch
invited them
things.
to give us direct input.
To give us direct input on pre-construction and where they're at based on.
Let me just say, look, I think we can summarize this. I think we're in agreement that we need GIS resources. Is that correct?
Yeah, we need a GIS capacity.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
And
See,
so,
I mean, I look at GIS data maybe a little differently. I'm looking at GIS data in terms of pole counts. This is different than your GIS data sounds more like 911 addresses.
Well, it's also.
We need a combination of,
It
It's all,
includes,
to me, it's all the same.
it's all
Okay,
design.
it's all
You know,
in
you get
this.
down to the design, it's gonna be hub locations, it's going to be splitter locations.
right, but the
It's gonna be
911 data
standalone.
set is not going to have, there's a utility pole located
No,
at
that's
this
why,
site.
Yeah, that's why we need.
We're going to
GIS.
supplement address data with what we know about internet at that address with electric infrastructure, because we need that information to string fiber from point A to point B to get to the member's house.
There's another reason, just to support your logic there. The definition of universal service will be driven by the electric distribution system.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's E911 plus electric, and it should also be driven by existing assets. So that should be part of the data set.
so I can tell you 100%. So VEC and GMP both have all of that data in one place. They have the E911 locations by service type or by speed. Of course, all the electric assets are there. The telecom assets are not in there. They exist, so you couldn't do a hub thing,
Right.
but if that's available, it can be added. And so, you know, in those service territories, you're able to get exactly what you want. What was supposed to be added to that was what are the CUD service territories within all of those electric territories? You can see the overlap. And
Right, but this goes to support Christine's comment about, this is not where Christine is going to sit there and crunch data on. We need to outsource this or capacity within our system that we can build up this infrastructure of GIS data.
And I think
So
a
it's
lot of it
beneficial and
exists
useful to
or is very
CUDs.
close to existing already. That's
And
why I
I'm
don't.
happy to, like, we have a discussion on some of the data later on. I'm happy to show you all the different layers and of what's there. I think this is more about the act of synthesizing data wherever the data comes
Right.
from
Yeah.
that we need to support when it comes to staffing.
So after we talk about baseline, maybe we come back on this.
Okay, exactly. I think the
I think it's all part of
baseline,
that.
we need to deal with the baseline ASAP because that helps drive the rest of the decision making. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, if we could switch, before we leave this topic, I also wanted to say that I would like to make Rob the deputy director in terms of this organization. We work hand in hand and certainly, you know, we'll divide up our responsibilities between each other. But, and that's when we can have, you know, if you want to have that in executive session, we can.
Is there a direct, I apologize, I do not have the Act 71 memorized yet. Is there a space for a deputy director?
a lot of space. for
Yeah.
staff.
Okay,
It's
It's
just-
wide open.
okay, it's up to us.
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
That seems like appropriate for executive session.
Yeah,
Not that I'm not expressing an opinion against it. I'm just saying,
I think the position of executive director is in public session. If we appoint Rob, that's a staffing issue. That's a separate.
We can talk about the deputy director role generally in public session. If we're going to
Exactly.
talk about Rob in that role, we should go to executive session.
Agreed. Or that's delegated to
I-
Christine to appoint, you deal with it. We appoint the position, you deal with hiring.
so are you trying, so I'm a little confused. Is your approach here to get to the point of publishing an org chart?
ultimately, that's got to happen, doesn't need to happen today.
Right. Well, and that's really,
Yeah.
you brought it up as a position. So are you asking that the board vote on that today?
I don't think we're prepared to do that, Christine.
Yeah.
This is a little bit
No, I-
herky jerky right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we won't have an
No,
executive
I was
director,
not requesting approval of this.
Okay.
We're presenting this for deliberation. That's what all these things are. We can decide when we want to approve these things.
but, okay, Laura.
So I would love to see a high level job description. I mean, not in the weeds, but what are the responsibilities? Because, for instance, I think about if you're hiring from within, there are some key roles here. So I want to make sure that the activities, if you ended up hiring somebody from within, those key roles were identified or that we knew we were going to have to replace. For instance, if you were to bring in somebody like a Rob, do Rob's current activities continue or do we bring in someone behind? So again, I don't need what are the responsibilities that you envision?
Again, we need a presentation of the staffing and what this position would do. And there's Rob's position now.
Yeah.
What is that happens with Rob's position? We just need an overall umbrella picture of what are the staffing needs? What are you proposing for staffing needs? And what's our budget also for
I think
staffing?
that's what I'm showing here is the overall umbrella. What I'm hearing is you'd like a specific job description for the deputy director.
So
Or would you like job descriptions for each?
See, I'm not ready to deal with this because I didn't think we
I'm
were
not asking
talking
you to deal
about,
with it.
so I
I'm
didn't think
asking
we were
you what
talking
you-
about this.
I'm
We
asking
need
for an
to
action item.
agree, but there's some baseline stuff. We need to come up the learning curve together. And then very quickly thereafter, we're going to hit this. So
Okay.
completely appreciate that.
But I want
This-
do I have an action item coming out of this discussion?
Sure.
That's what I want. And just be clear what it is.
Less than 1 page, right?
Yeah, no, I'm looking for bullet points. I am not looking for, a 2-page, 3-page.
Not the HR
So the
department.
action item I have is
Not the
to,
14-page.
coming out of this discussion, the action item is to develop a high-level job description.
For each of the positions that you,
For each
and
of the
capacities
positions.
that you would like us to bring in,
Okay.
just so that we understand how the pieces come together. Does that make sense, Pat?
Yes, and I'd also like a budget, how this is funded. So we've got a pot of money
Thank you.
and we also have to assign dollars to this.
Okay,
And it's gonna be difficult to have that discussion without that process
Yeah.
document Christine is gonna develop, which is, what is our process to take the funds that we're responsible for, make people aware that they're available, take in the grant applications and then award and track the performance, right? I mean, that's the work. This is the staffing to do that work. So those two have to kind of go hand in hand.
Exactly.
I will now make a comment about legal
Okay.
in open session.
now let me also ask you another question.
No, I won't.
Christine, Holly has the floor.
Oh, sorry.
So I've heard from people at the department about legal services. I've spoken with you a little bit, Christine. I've talked to some very experienced counsel in the outside world. My best advice to this board and to you, Christine, is that we have a type of a general counsel that advises the board and advises the staff on grant documents, on open meeting laws, on various kinds of compliance, right? In terms of paper production, it could be the case that that general counsel is able to source that as required. And that's if we take a law firm and make a contract with somebody to provide those legal services. Yes, I have somebody in mind. It's also practical to house a person that does grant administration and documentation in-house that is supporting that function.
Mhm.
I don't see it as part of a finance job description, just so you, just
That's-
That's why we have legal and finance.
drafting grant agreements under finance does not
You see
compute,
that in your
Okay.
legal.
very definitely.
That's-
And so that's just a generic way of saying there's more than one way to skin the cat. And I think outsourcing high-level advice, even if it's daily advice, can be accomplished.
So I will just say, coming from an entity in my real world experience that does a lot of granting, we have a grants and finance person who have that work reviewed legally. So the grants are not developed. They're which is to say, I think we have options.
We have options, and part of it is the fact that we might start with if we're worried about the grant documentation, we're going to start with a lot of that in a format that's been used here.
Okay, before we leave the staff discussion, are we done with the legal questions?
For now.
Hiring the administrative assistant the process has already begun. It actually began before I even came on because the recognition of the need was there. Question for the board is, shall I halt that process until we come to an agreement on the staffing and budget and
And the administrative assistant is going to do,
well,
How does it fit into the work to be done? And
okay, so
But there's a whole level of supporting this board that
Yeah.
is administrative.
yeah, so, all right, so question I have for the board is, shall I halt that process?
and I'm just going to jump in and go around the room. Let's do it that way. I'm not suggesting we halt the process. I think there's a clear need for help here. I think it would be some flesh on the bones. What that person would do initially in their first month. What are they doing? What is the administrative assistant doing? In addition to supporting us, they are doing XYZ.
Okay?
That's my question. I don't know if you're prepared to
Not
answer
prepared to
that.
answer that, I mean,
Okay.
For me, actually, I think if I had an understanding of the flow of how the expected, all of this, what's the process that we're going to use? And then we can start staffing. These are the people we need to make this process work. If we agree on the process, then we can find the resources to make the process work. I would prefer to do that than, I agree that we need a lot of this. I just don't know to what extent and permanency or contract, all that. So a process would be the best way to start in my mind. And then we staff the process according. So this administrative person may have multiple duties if we knew what the process was. And maybe that's the best place to start. I don't know. I'll offer that.
I concur with that.
Laura.
Sorry.
Thank you. I would like to have that kind of administrative capacity continue moving, but I agree. I mean, I think we have to have some sense of, and also some understanding that we're building something from scratch and quickly.
Is there
I'm
a,
sure all the
is there a hire imminent? Like, where are we in the process of
job
this?
description that was,
No, but is like somebody about to be made an offer or?
no. The question is, I discovered the process was started. I discovered this yesterday, so.
Okay.
So, question it becomes, that's exactly why I'm asking the question. It's like, all right, so some of this, the legal process started, I halted that 2 weeks ago. The administrative process started, I can halt that as well.
Who's starting these processes? The DPS?
The DPS, yeah.
I think in the legislation,
It
that
does
was
say
supposed to be
that.
a transition. The idea was to get the board up and running and have some support when it started. The way the time frame worked out, that didn't happen. I think with the administrative assistant, I think within the classified system, there's set job descriptions for it.
Okay.
And then you could put within that what those job responsibilities are. So sorry, I know we were going around the board.
Yeah,
so
let's
I'm
go
skipping
around the
process,
room.
sorry.
This is helpful, Rob, and we'll come back to you, but let's go, Brian.
I agree with what Dan said. Ideally, if we can't have perfect clarity on process to then fit the team and the roles into it, if the timing doesn't work for that, then it's, I'm less worried about administrative support because it will benefit all of us. But I think you're going to hear a recurring theme from me. All the state work I've done, especially around grant administration, I've always been unimpressed with the sanctity of the value of the dollar. And so I'm going to be beating the drum of let's not waste money and let's not spend money unthoughtfully. So this one probably doesn't make that radar, but that's the lens I always look at stuff through.
I agree with what's being said about process first, and while the legislation provided for the DPS to make inquiries into legal hires and administrative support, it wasn't clear that it was implied, I believe, in the legislation, that was to get ready for this board to come together and begin to act. We're here now. They should stop whatever they're doing. We should take it on. We should hire our own people. We should do our own work. And they didn't get it done before we got here. So that's fine. Let's do it.
One other point of information, this is clarification that we need to get from PSD, is another part of the legislation provides PSD with additional funds to be able to cover the administrative support. This administrative assistant that they may be hiring, from the little that I've heard so far, would be with them. We need an additional administrative assistant here to support the board, to support Christine and I, to go down and let people in and answer the phone and not be the auto warranty people. They didn't want to join our meeting. That's why I left. Like there's a lot of just that basic level, as well as preparing the board for each meeting. I think since Friday, Christine and I have worked nonstop to try to get ready for this meeting. It's not always going to be like this, but there's a lot to be done in order to keep all of us informed.
Can I ask one question before you jump in? With this, Christine, do you envision, like if you were to hire somebody today, exactly how Rob described it, we've got a bunch of like on the ground work that needs to be done, setting up Zoom meetings, preparing packets, getting material out, and getting that to start spinning smoothly.
Finding a place to file the minutes.
Exactly.
Finding a bigger room.
Getting us set up with emails. I wouldn't want the two of you doing that. Somebody else should be doing it.
6 hours, 2-3 hours each Friday, just trying
Meeting
to find a room.
management is a time sink. But once that person gets up and running, would it be envisioned they're doing other things after that? So who you hire is not just an administrative assistant, but can grow into other capacities. And I don't know if we have that capability to have that type of person come on board. State employees tend to be very boxy. It's not in my job description. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to hire that
GIS skills,
person.
That'd be great.
No,
You never know.
Can I comment on that, Patty?
Yeah.
I don't think that there's, we'll get this setting up stuff done and then that goes away. It's going,
There's total management, but
it's
there's
gonna be
yeah.
a continuing need of basic administration or baseline administration. It could be the case that somebody who's doing administrative work helps log in grant responses and tracks deadlines on
Mhm.
grant responses and RFPs and does some of that process work in addition to board administration and other administration. But, I don't think it goes away.
I don't think it goes away, but instead of 6 hours, it's an hour. Eventually it gets into you're humming along. You no longer have to set up emails. The emails are done. Zoom, once you have a Zoom account set up and whatever, that's done. And then it's quick management. The time sink shrinks.
Yeah.
And then that person needs to evolve into other things. So whoever we hire, it needs to be set up such that it grows into other things. Like you said, database management, assistance with GIS.
Mhm.
To me, the administrative assistant should be a broader than just paper shuffle.
Fielding calls for all the CUDs and what they need.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, right now, that's Rob,
Right.
as intended.
As in tag.
Right.
There's
Yeah, that's the 1,000 balls.
But that's something that we
previous.
can try to discuss later on as we're reorganizing some of these things. There's also like just the basics of posting minutes, updating the website.
Which is
Like,
not,
I'm trying to do all of this
That's
right now
not-
and everything else,
Yeah,
which
it's
is
a lot.
a challenge for myself personally and a challenge for the board in this effort. So this is really a support person for Christine and I that should be a Jack or Jill or whatever of all trades to some extent.
So the reason I ask these questions is personally, I would be fine moving ahead with an administrative assistant with that hire knowing their job is going to evolve. It's not here's my box, I'm going to stay in these four corners. I don't need to have the whole objectives, everything plainly laid out and mapped out, because I know we need this immediately right now. That I'll finish with that.
I'm also fine with that, but I want to go back to Rob's point, make sure that, or something he had said earlier, make sure we're all clear I think you were talking about 2 administrative assistants a few minutes ago.
Yes, I was talking about, I believe the department is hiring one to deal with what they expect the additional load that they're gonna, whether it's processing grant, payments or the running them through one span or those types of things. And that we might need some clarification. But then there's another role that is supporting you all, the board, and that's supporting Christine and I.
And so Patty, it would be great, I think, for us to have a sense of what that person will do for the PSD in the future, if we could get some knowledge about what that support role will be. And then I want to be clear that what you were asking us, should I continue, was the support person for you and Bob.
Yeah, yes.
And the board.
And the
but-
board.
And the board.
And the board,
excuse me,
Except
yes.
one thing, yes, that's what I was talking about, and this discussion reveals that I will get more clarification, whether you ask me or not. Clear, I need more clarification on who they plan on hiring and what the role is, because it's going to be billed to us.
Right, and where that fits in the process.
Yeah.
Well, and
Did we
I
have-
do recall this from the commissioner, I have the legislation up right now.
Good.
Looking to see it.
Good, because I'm wondering, to me, it seemed like the administration reference was you have administrative capacity because you won't be doing the same things you were doing. So please share with the nascent board until they're set up. That's how I heard it, not go hire a new person.
That's confusing though. So
Well,
if we're gonna have 2 admin people,
So one's for the PSD.
So my
and one's
wasting
for us.
everything is going crazy right
Yeah.
now.
yeah. For good reason.
I guess it's a larger question of what we want to take on, like, do
Is
we
that a
wanna
question
deal
for
with the
Ledge
plan?
Council or are
Can
you?
we tell the department what their administrative support responsibilities will be in collaboration with what we're expecting to staff ourselves, so that there's a definition that we make, they can respond to, and it's coordinated? Let's do that.
Laura, can we do that?
I mean, I think we certainly can try. I mean, I know the
I- I
commissioner,
know.
I'm sure the commissioner will have an opinion.
Oh, absolutely, but now we're having a productive conversation. Let's beg forgiveness, not ask permission.
Yes.
I agree with you.
Okay, so I'll take an action item out of this. We're going to describe what we need from an administrative assistant. I'm going to share that with the department.
I think we're gonna describe what we need from an administrative support standpoint between the department and the board.
Right.
And then we'll look at those responsibilities, which responsibilities sit on which side, and then think about how do we now get the people to provide that?
Yep.
Or person to provide that.
Okay,
And maybe we're
Yeah.
sharing the same person.
Yes, exactly.
It may be 2 half position, 0.5 FTEs.
Perfect.
right, and the goal here is to be effective. We know we need administrative support right now. That's clear. We need to be effective. We need to be cost accountable. So if we all of a sudden have 2 administrative assistants, that begs the question of, it makes us pause. It complicates this.
Makes me pause.
So there was a certain amount of funds appropriated to the department to support this effort that's separate from the funds that were given to us
Mhm.
in order to staff up and to build the board.
But those funds will be billed back to the board, correct?
Yes.
And-
Yeah, so let's just use those funds all together and get the right solution. And hopefully it's one person.
Exactly.
Okay,
And to your point earlier, Patty, it should be a growth position. They'll start with some blocking and tackling, but ideally there'll be some growth opportunities and skill development for the
Exactly.
right individual.
Right, and we want flexibility to manage that versus
Yes.
having it in a box, square box, they can't get out of that box. It's not my job description, can't do that. I don't want to deal with that.
thank you. Thank you.
We want Rob clones.
Well,
Yes.
we can talk about that in staff. I don't know if we have that technology yet.
Executive session.
I think, so I feel like you've given me adequate direction.
Okay.
All
right.
Do we need to talk about staffing more in an executive session and want to add that? Wouldn't be adding it would be extending this elsewhere in the agenda and
Okay.
move on to hearing about the pre-construction, so we do have some
I would
guests.
suggest for now, we park the staffing and come back to it, see if we need it to address any more, but we have a time certain 9:30. So let's tee
Yeah,
that up,
Okay,
and then if need be, we can come back to staffing.
okay, I'm gonna stop presenting now. And I'm going to make sure, sorry to talk to myself through this, everybody. So I am going to make David Jones a presenter. He's with Deerfield Valley CUD. David, are you there?
Same.
David, unmute. Do we see David?
I see DJ.
I see DJ.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, moving between screens.
No worries. So this was added to the agenda just to get an idea if there's been a general need to better understand where the CUDs are at, to understand the pre-construction needs, understand where things are going. So that's why several different CUDs are going to provide a few minutes of that and be open for questions. So I'll start with Dave. Do you want to introduce yourself and share your screen for your slide?
I will try to share my screen. I am not quite, let's see how I do that.
I can see if I can pull it up as well.
Is it, screen share. Okay, got that.
Right next to the leave button. There you go. Maybe.
Can you see that? Okay.
We don't see it yet.
It might be how it's. Let's see.
Let's see.
Oh, here we go.
Which CD is David from?
DD.
Deerfield, thank you.
Okay, Rob, I don't think I'm going to be able to share my screen.
Okay, let me open it. You did share this with me this morning, so let me I'll put it on mine and share mine. It's just one slide, so.
Okay, well, while Rob's working on that, I'll introduce myself. I'm David Jones. I am the vendor committee chair of the Deerfield Valley Communications Union District, which is primarily in Windham County, plus several towns in Bennington County and one in Windsor. Our chair, Ann Manwaring, and our vice chair, Stephen John, are unable to attend today, and so I am representing TV Fiber. My goal in the 3 minutes that I have is to describe succinctly what we have been up to for the last year and a half, and where we're going, hopefully with the board's help. After 1 year of organizing, research, planning, we ran an RFP process to select our private sector partner or partners. And then after several months of review and discussion with the leading candidates, we selected Great Works Internet, Biddeford, Maine, GWI. We're working with GWI to prepare an engineering and pre-construction contract that we intend to have ready for signature when we have a pre-construction grant agreement. Our key goal is to have a full season of construction next year, which requires that we make substantial progress on the pre-construction tasks this year. And those tasks include completing a high-level design for all 24 towns, completing utility pole surveys in the remaining phase 1 towns. We completed 4 in part with help from our CARES Act grant last year. We need to complete the detailed engineering for the construction to be done in 2022. That would be a subset of towns. We'll need to iterate our financial plan based on the findings from the design and engineering process. Planning is iterative, as I think you all know. We will need to then prepare the RFPs for the construction subcontractors. We understand that there has been a discussion of whether pre-construction grants should not be awarded until there is a comprehensive statewide design of some kind. And as a practical matter, the way we see it, the time required to develop a comprehensive statewide plan would consume at least months and would set us back as much of a year if we're not able to accomplish substantial utility make ready this year as the result of the planning and poll applications. So our recommendation is, and our hope is that the board will focus statewide design efforts on middle mile connections between the major carrier interconnection points and CUD networks, CUD islands, that is sections of CUDs that are separated by wide expanses, and electric utility fiber. All of these are fiber assets to be owned and constructed, or are owned and have been constructed by municipalities and regulated utilities. Our immediate next step is to clarify the pre-construction grant RFP requirements and process so that we can be ready when the process is open, so that we can bring our contract to you and our proposal, and hopefully get the funding we need to begin work.
Thank you, David. And this is a question from the board. Do we want to do questions now after each one, or do we want to do questions at the end?
Yes, let's do them individually.
Okay.
Hi, David. Thank you for that overview. I'm wondering if you know how many locations in your district need to be served in your planning process.
Right. We have approximately 8,000 underserved or unserved addresses in our 24 towns. And we have roughly 800 miles of fiber. I mean, 800 miles of what we anticipate to be fiber routes.
Thank you.
We will know this when we go, and those numbers come from our ability to use Department of Public Service public data and to do some GIS work on our own. We are going to be reviewing all of our numbers in the pre-construction process in the high-level design and the detailed engineering plans, so that we have the very clear picture of what we're building to.
And David, just to clarify, that the number you gave of unserved addresses, is that the base 2019 data, or does that account for wired addresses served by the Connectivity Initiative, addresses that are going to be funded through the FCC RDOF program? I just want to make sure we're talking about the same numbers. So we're going to talk about numbers later in the presentation, later in the meeting as well.
Right. Rob, to be perfectly honest, I don't have a cheat sheet of numbers in front of me, and my memory is such that I gave you numbers off the top of my head and would not trust them.
Sure.
So, but I can provide those numbers in an email in the course of the meeting or after. We have done substantial work to study the DPS numbers, to study the mileage of our area, and that work has been the basis for our original business plan when we had 15 towns, our internal financial models when we were making decisions about which vendors to hire, and will be, constantly part of our decision process.
David, this is Patty Richards. Thank you for joining us today. Just wanted to dig a little bit into the 800 miles. Is that 800 represent backbone, middle mile, and to the house? Can you describe the 800 miles in a little bit more granularity?
Right. When you look at our district, there's really two sets of premises and miles that you'll be concerned with. One is the total, every area, cabled and uncabled. And the other is the unserved and underserved areas. There are, to the best of my recollection, somewhere in the range of 35,000 total addresses in our service area, but only a minority of those are currently uncabled. It's our goal to provide universal service to those uncabled areas. We will inevitably pass some of the cabled areas when we're getting from one uncabled area to another, and we do intend to serve addresses along those routes. And then there is the possibility that even though areas are served now, later on, after we have completed our work to serve the unserved and underserved, there may be a demand for us to serve currently served areas that we can serve in a economically profitable manner that would subsidize the unserved and underserved areas. So, our order of operation is unserved and underserved, and then discretion to look at other addresses.
But of the 800 miles, will you be doing the full middle mile? Help me with the 800 miles. I still
Right.
Not
Yeah, that's an estimate. Basically, the starting point estimate for required fiber miles is the number of road miles. And that is an estimate of the road miles in the uncabled areas, plus a small amount of miles in cable areas that we need to, that are the routes between the uncabled areas.
So it's to reach all premises in your district that aren't served by cable. It's where you come up with that 800-mile figure.
Yes.
But not partnering with other cable entities. So there's no fiber in this area.
There is some fiber in this area that actually it's your area that Duncan Cable provides some fiber coverage and some cable coverage in 2 of the towns.
And notably, Consolidated has built fiber in Brattleboro and has, as I think you know, announced plans to build fiber in other cabled areas.
And that there is fiber through FirstNet, formerly SovereignNet, other fiber that's not available for residential service in that area.
Yeah.
So there is that could be middle mile. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. There will be substantial middle mile mileage necessary just to get from here to there. And to the extent that we can make use of existing assets in a cost-effective way, we certainly aim to do that. And that will be part of the high-level design and engineering process. Without the professional help of the designers at GWI, we would be unable to say just how much of our mileage can be sourced from existing sources cost effectively.
I have other questions that I would ask David, but I'm mindful that we have other presenters.
Any other quick questions?
Just on the immediate next step. I just want to clarify. So David, the immediate next step is that you all are waiting, whoops, no, it's gone, for clarification from us on the pre-construction RFP?
Yes, our hope is to get going on our work as soon as possible, so that we can do the pre-construction work this year to enable the construction work next year. If we understand the RFP requirements and process, we will make application just as soon as we can, so we can get going.
Last one from me, David. It's Holly Groshner. You characterize GWI as your partner. What is the scope of that partnership? Is that your design build partner, your system operating partner? What is GWI to your CUD?
Right. We are contracting with GWI well, first of all, I should preface it by saying we are going to own our assets. We will be the network owner. We will be the policy decision maker regarding the construction plans, the pricing, the quality, and every service policy. GWI is our contracted partner to accomplish this on our behalf. And they will be our engineer. They will be our construction manager. They will be our network operator. And they will be a standard offer internet and voice services provider.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who do we have next?
Jane, would you like to go next from Lamoille? Are you here?
I am here. It's telling me I can't share my screen.
I'm changing that right now.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to now.
Okay. Let's go there. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a bit of a delay. Not again, I will pull it up. I'm sorry, we're still trying to figure out all this technology here. If I can, if it's easier. Oh, here we go.
Can you see it now?
Oh, no. We just
It says I'm sharing. It says I can stop sharing.
let me. Oh, there you go. Perfect.
We ready?
Yeah, we are ready.
Great. Thank you. I'm Jane Campbell. I'm the chair of Lamoille FiberNet CUD. And as you can see at the top, we now have 9 towns. Wolcott has joined our CUD recently. What we've been doing, we've done the feasibility study, high-level design, the business plan review. We co-authored an RFP with NEK Broadband, and we're currently in discussions with potential partners. At the same time, we're transitioning to all the systems that we need for management. In the next few months, we assume we will select and negotiate an MOU with a partner or partners. It would be the same sort of setup that David just talked about. And of course, we'll do the legal review, financial analysis, et cetera. And that will lead next to the high-level design and redo the business plan as needed. Once we get the VCBB funding, then we'll create the detailed design and we will start working on getting the make ready, the equipment, the construction services, et cetera. The key to our business plan, and this is really important, is that we need to go into the areas that are the higher take rate areas. And that's relatively speaking, we are one of those rural areas that for-profits haven't addressed because the take rates have been so low. But we need those higher take rate areas, which will give us higher revenues to then be able to fund the network building in the lower take rate areas. And as you can see in the bottom of this screen, our phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we're assuming we'll build our asset base with grant funds, and then we'll leverage those assets to be able to start borrowing to extend the network, and then we'll eventually go to the bond market to build the rest of the network. The context that we're working in, and this is why that higher take rate, higher revenue area is so important, is that as we are ever since we started, we've been facing other organizations, other companies building in our area and taking some of those higher take rate, higher revenue areas. We are talking to some of those folks. We've opened conversation channels there. We, at the same time, obviously, are having conversations with the organizations that responded to our RFP.
And then we're very aware that as we're moving forward, we all feel this sense of urgency. I think I can say that for all the CUDs, because as we're moving forward, we're very aware that rural areas all over the country have gotten broadband funding and are vying for the exact same partners and specialized personnel and materials. In Rob's email, he kind of posed the question, well, what if we waited? What if we delayed things further to be able to do statewide design or something like that? And the assumption that funding will be available has been really key as we're able to talk to these potential partners. It helps them know that, yes, our CUD will be able to follow through with what we're saying. It's also going to impact our ability to develop strategic and operational plans, which is some of our work in the next year. And obviously competing for the needed materials and labor. As the competition goes up, the pricing is going to go up and the supplies will be more and more limited. So that's in a nutshell. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you.
And just one clarifying thing on that, on your slide, you said the pre-construction funding so far will get you to construction. You're not talking about the pre-construction funding from H315, the grants that have already been administered. You're talking about the need for this additional grant funding.
Right.
Okay. It's challenging. We have some programs with the same.
Right. The funding that we already, the 315 funding will get us to the end of the year, will get us through the MOU process, will get us through hiring our, this week we're interviewing finalist candidates for our executive director position, et cetera. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, Laura.
Thanks, Jane. With regards to the higher take rate areas and the need to hit those first, can you tell me, are those primarily cabled, or do they have fiber, or are they really, are those higher take rates underserved at this point?
These are underserved areas. So we're assuming, yeah, no. Some of our district is cabled. In one area, one town in our district, the cable company is stringing fiber, and we have said, let us know how we can help when you get to the edges, if you need help there. The other cabled areas will likely be the last areas that we go to, but we're really starting with those high priority areas where it's unserved or underserved.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Jane, this is Patty Richards. Thank you for being with us today. One question that I will ask, I am remiss that I did not ask David, and maybe Rob would know this, but did you participate in the RDOF auction? Did you have a
No, we did not. We did not. Consolidated is in a lot of our district, and their RDOF territory is in a lot of our district.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, in terms of Deerfield?
They also did not end up participating. Their partner did not bid for those areas. Some of those areas were won by Consolidated.
Okay.
Some were won by SpaceX.
I think the only CUD that participated and in fact was awarded under RDOF was EC Fiber.
I think it's EC Fiber in collaboration with various utilities. So we're going to hear from CV Fiber and NEK, and they both have regions as well. They might be able to provide additional clarification. And later in the agenda, we have a map that we'll bring up as well.
Perfect. Any other questions of Jane? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. So let's move back to Addison County, Maple Broadband. I believe Steve is presenting.
I am here. Let's try if I can share the screen.
Make sure that you have those abilities. Once again, I apologize. I'm still learning Teams here. I believe I gave you that, but let me find out for sure.
Yeah.
If not, it'll appear momentarily. I did. So you do have the ability to share. Should be right next to the leave button.
Well, let's just see how this goes. Oh, this looks good.
There you go. Okay.
Do we have something? Do we have something there?
Success.
Oh, great. Okay. Okay. I'm actually quite surprised. we're going to have you do it again, Rob. My name's Steve. Huffaker. I'm the chair of Maple Broadband. We represent 20 Addison County towns and municipalities, we'll say. And like Jane, we're acting with a sense of urgency to try to work our way through all these pre-construction tasks so we can begin construction. So there's 2 slides here. This first slide kind of gives you some background about how we got to where we are. One item on that first bullet, we did spend quite a bit of time on an RFP process and actually had a misstep at one point, but which resulted in kind of a delay in that process. But the one big lesson I think that we learned was that we originally were hoping that we could cherry pick, if you will, assigning high-level network design, say, to one entity, possibly pull surveys to another. And after a kind of thorough interview with our bidders, we concluded that that was just going to dilute accountability. So we decided that it was in our best interest to award all the work to one organization. In June, we approached our governing board with our recommendations, and our board approved our approach, which was to award the pre-construction tasks listed there to one engineering firm, and incidentally, that engineering firm was the low bidder. I say here in italics that pole make ready was intentionally excluded from the RFP. We did include pole attachment license applications, just since it seemed like kind of a labor grind that we didn't want to deal with at this point, and it really wasn't going to impact our going forward steps. The key here is the next bullet. We applied for $1.3 million to grant pre-construction tasks, but as many of you are aware, 315 just didn't have that kind of money available. So in discussions with Rob, we've scaled back and asked exclusively for $45,000, which was to cover the cost of the high-level network design. Okay. I was going to ask if you had questions at this point, but I think we're just going to go to the next one if I can change. There we go. Okay. Okay. So this is a kind of an aspirational document at this point. There's a lot that we don't know. We don't know to what degree VCBB is going to want to dictate our various steps and how that might impact our schedule. And we also, well, to some degree, I already have a good sense of when funds might be available to fund our next steps. And so this is kind of a caveat at the top of that to capture that. Sometime later this month, we're going to have a network management agreement executed. That agreement will capture both maintenance and management of our network, as well as providing services over our network. And under the terms of that agreement, we own all the infrastructure that we build, and we run the show, which is our drive towards ensuring that we do have ultimate access to the municipal bond market. Next month, we're also going to receive the high-level network design, and under this, I wanted to just make a quick mention. I'm thinking about this approved part, and I'm thinking that based on my discussions with our engineering firm, I believe, and I kind of want to kind of be careful about expressing this properly, but my sense is that network design, we can tinker with that design for a while without having it impact the timeline. So my thought is here that if that may be well where VCBB wants to have some input on what that design looks like. And I'm thinking that depending on the pace of what VCBB does, that may not interfere with our timeline. In other words, I'm thinking we can run, and I have to validate this a little farther, but I'm thinking we can continue to proceed, and then at the side, working with the VCBB to make any necessary adjustments. For example, based on what little I've heard about what you have in mind, it mostly related to perhaps augmenting your network, our network, to serve a greater goal. So I'm thinking that kind of thing might be dedicated buffer tubes in some of the infrastructure, which would then be dedicated specifically to the state of Vermont requirements rather than Addison County requirements. So I'm thinking we can do those kind of things possibly without facing any delays associated with the work we need to do. We'll be working with our network engineer to identify the build sequence, and this is kind of ties in what Jane had said. I think we're going to be trying to drive towards a higher take rate for underserved subscribers. Our big interest at this point is as rapidly as possible reach the municipal bond market, and we see that that being achieved once we have several hundred subscribers, 200 or 300 subscribers. That might be sufficient for us to reach the municipal bond market. So we're going to use that as a one criterion for selecting the build sequence. And there's, of course, other criteria that we need to look at, but the build sequence will kind of drive the next steps that we engage in. So once we know which town or area of our organization is going to be built first, we commission poll surveys in that area, and then we proceed. After that work is done, we will, once the poll surveys are done in that area, we will then engage our engineering firm to begin on the detailed design, construction bid documents for that area. And so one of the other realizations that we came to during the process was that I kept thinking about this as a serial process. First, we have to do high-level design, then we have to do poll surveys, then we have to do detailed network design, and that's too broad. What we're doing is we're breaking it down into construction zones, and as we identify each construction zone, we survey that zone and do construction bid documents for that zone, then move on to the next zone. So in that way, we can keep the process moving. Also in September, we're going to be issuing a business plan, which naturally is going to follow the details of the network management agreement. October, the big risk factor to us is long lead time materials. I'm sure all of you have heard all about that: ships, shortages, OLTs, ONTs, fiber cable. And so we have an opportunity here to take advantage of the fact that our network manager that we're going to be executing an agreement with has facilities that are capable of taking delivery of long lead time materials that are delivered, say, at the end of the first quarter of next year or sometime in the second quarter of next year, so that when we're ready to build, we don't have the absence of materials to delay us. What else did I want to tell you about? I think that in terms of the place where we stand the most risk as it relates to VCBB activities is funding. As it stands right now, we have sufficient funds to pay the engineering firm to do the high-level design, and we don't have any money to do the poll surveys. And based on what I sense, that Act 71 funds, I don't know when they're going to be available to us, but my estimation is that we will probably want to commission poll surveys sometime, say, mid-September. That's 4 weeks out, so I'm thinking the date's going to slip. I don't think we can meet that date. I think probably poll surveys aren't going to be commissioned until October or November, depending on how long the grant process slows us down. That's it. That's all I've got. Questions?
Laura, you're up.
Thanks for your presentation and love your logo, by the way. Are you all planning on owning your network? I'm sorry if I missed that. Yes? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Steve, this is Patty Richards jumping in quickly. I'm going to ask the same question of everybody. Do you have an RDOF position?
No, we evaluated that, and there really wasn't much real estate in our region that was impacted by RDOF, and it seemed like even for those areas that are impacted by RDOF, they're probably going to be the last locations that are going to be accessed by RDOF winners. So we may well be able to get access to those areas before the winners, if that's a choice that we choose to make.
Okay, thank you. Paula, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve, for the presentation. Can you give us what your ballpark is on addresses that need to be served for universal service?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. No, I can't give you that. I can tell you that the miles are about 500 miles. I was scrambling to try to find a number for you, thinking that you were going to ask, and I do not have it. I can get it back. But
all right.
At a high level, I can tell you that the DPS figures are what we've been working against all along. So whatever Rob has furnished and is up on their website is what we use as our basis.
And I have a follow along, if I might. Am I right in understanding that you anticipate having a different entity that's your design, engineering, construction group, and another entity that is your operating manager?
No. Oh, wait. Yes, it's different. Excuse me. I misinterpreted.
Two different entities.
Yeah. So the design and engineering firm they're nothing but telecom engineers. That's all they are. They're not an operator. They're not a content provider. All they do is design network. And so the operations and maintenance of the infrastructure, as well as providing service over our network, is all falls to our upcoming network manager.
And do you know who that is?
I do, and I cannot share because we're days away from executing that agreement.
Thank you.
Right.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How about Jeremy here, CV Fiber? And then our last one will be NEK unless another CUD wants to participate.
All right, let me share this. Hold on a second.
Steve, you may have to stop your screen share. Oh, there we go.
All right, is that visible to everybody?
Yes.
Terrific. So thanks for having me. I'm Jeremy Hansen. I'm the chair of CV Fiber. We have 20 towns here in central Vermont, mostly Washington County, but also some adjacent counties too. We have an application from Waterbury, which will be considered this evening. So we may be 21 later today. I'm not going to read the slide to you here. I want to make a couple mentions about what we're doing, where we are. We have some folks under contract for doing the pole inventories right now. We are waiting for the funding to tell them to get started. We didn't want to have them get started until we had the money in our bank account, and for better or for worse, mostly for worse, there have been some delays, some bureaucratic, some otherwise, between the timing between getting the contracts done and getting the contracts in our accounts. It's a long delay. And we've had the contractors, I should say, ready to do this work for quite some time now. So not that fixing the finance process at the state is something that I'm going to ask you to try to solve. I just want to let you know that that's something that really impacts our timeline. As you're looking at putting grants together and the process for this, I would also request, and this got mentioned in the little briefing that I sent to you last week. Funding should be available in large enough sums so that we're going to be able to keep our contractors going. The moment that we sort of have to come up and take a breath and dive back down into it, that coming up and taking a breath, we may lose the contractors. We may add unnecessary delays to our process. I just want you to be cognizant of that. And then a couple of requests for things that the VCBB could help us with. And this is something that you've heard before, but auditing, GIS, legal, and then really looking at centralized bulk purchasing of fiber. So we all the CUDs know that we will be using fiber. Is it possible to, ahead of time, go and buy a fair bit of fiber at some centralized location, that's you all, that then the CUDs could come back and purchase from you later. Just a thought. Talking about statewide design should be supplemental to the CUD designs, and maybe looking at how CUDs interconnect, any non-CUD areas, how do those folks get involved in that network reliability. But we're already planning on interconnecting with our neighboring CUDs. We have active agreements with design with NEK and with EC Fiber. So as we're doing our high-level design, it's going to include NEK, CV Fiber, EC Fiber, and Washington Electric Co-op. This is a grant that we've applied for through 315, and we will be executing quite soon, as you can see in our timeline here. It's really just dependent on, again, funding landing in our accounts. Looking at our costs for detailed design, I just got this number in the last day or two. That cost I'm expecting to be about $1.5 million, and that includes the WEC areas. So the detailed design of our network along with WEC. So like I said, I can read over the slide, or I can explain the chart here. I'm hoping that it's reasonably self-explanatory, but I think I'll just stop there.
Or I have two questions. Thanks, Jeremy. Large enough grant making to allow your contractors to keep working. What does that mean?
So that it kind of depends at which phase that we're at, but we have our so whether we're talking about construction, pre-construction, what have you, we should have enough that we could be making actual progress, understanding the time of the bureaucratic pipeline, such that we start making some actual progress, and then we can already be partway through that first process while we're securing the funding for whatever the second part is. So I apologize.
Yeah, my apologies. I was unclear on my question. Can you give me a dollar amount?
For which part?
What size grant? Yeah, what size pre-construction grants would you recommend we be looking at?
We're going to apply for 1.5 million. So, and substantially all of that. I mean, we are not yet in a financial position where we have the cash flow to be able to absorb that, and then ask for reimbursement. So that, or very close to all of that. I haven't worked out the detailed timeline of what that looks like, of what the detailed design looks like, or how long, or understanding well how long the bureaucratic process is. But as I'm seeing the bureaucratic process, it's quite long, months between contract, between RFP and then actually applying for the grant, then getting the grant, and getting the actual grant money in the bank account. It's quite long.
And do you have a different amount for construction? Or would you still?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to depend. I don't have that number in front of me. I apologize. Actually, hold on. I might have it. I just need to look.
It's okay. I'm just looking for a basis of like some place for us to start. I mean, if hearing that. The other, I guess, is Patty. I've heard a lot of the CUDs asking about, can we do the central purchasing? I would like us to find out if we can. I don't know if we can. You may all know that already.
It's in the legislation.
Utilities. Well, can we functionally do it?
Good question.
There might be the cost of storing the material, unless it could be donated, to be challenging based on what I know of other equipment and what is charged by the state to store equipment.
That's a question for us to put up on the parking lot board.
Yeah.
So Christine,
There's also issues.
definitely
Everyone would
take a
have to
note.
subscribe to a set of technical criteria.
Yeah.
Components, and if they don't.
Fiber's not fiber, right?
Yeah, wire is not
different.
wire.
Exactly.
It can be if we want it to be, and if we want to make
if
that a requirement, but.
Right. If CV Fiber doesn't want to build to that standard that we just purchased, then we're stuck with a bunch of reels of fiber.
And with everybody at pre-construction at different phases, how would you know how much?
Different engineering companies doing
So this is a question, I actually have a question.
I want to,
clarify. Okay.
before we keep going, I just want to make sure, I'm going to fully disclose, anytime CV fiber or EC fiber speaks up, WEC is planning to build 860 miles of backbone. We are not planning to be what's called an internet service provider. We are planning to do fiber on our electric system and interconnect and help interconnect CV fiber and EC fiber. So WEC's position in this, I just super transparent. That's our role in this. So Jeremy states working with WEC, that's the connection there.
WEC will own the asset.
We will own.
And the asset will be roadside, it's not middle mile.
It is middle mile. WEC's portion is all middle mile. We're not doing anything.
Are there
from
any
the-
others?
Yeah, so Velco has a project, it's underway. We are already procuring our materials and we are looking for construction much sooner than any of this. But for full disclosure, we're going to do substations and solar and storage generation along these routes. It's not associated with any of this. It's a standalone project. We will partner with anyone that needs access to this middle mile fiber, but we're not in this business. So I just want to make sure that's understood.
I have a question for Jeremy. Phase 1 says it's going to go to 85% of the unserved and underserved addresses. What's the other 15% going to do?
They will get caught up in phase 2.
And
So this,
and phase 2 says it's a build out from the core, and I don't understand what that's meaning.
so we want in the same vein as what the previous CUDs said, we have to go to the places that are going to have the highest take rates, that are going to give us the firm financial foundation that we can build upon, because the grant money doesn't get us across the finish line. This is going to get us going, and we will eventually, look at the bond market for filling in those gaps. But so we're going to do the design for everything all at once. The high level design and the detailed design, we will get that. We will get that done. Well, at least the high level design. We will design the entire network, again, in conjunction with WEC and NEK and EC Fiber. We will build that. We'll design that all at once. And then we're going to actually go to the places where we think we're going to be the most likely to be able to serve people. But then the other 15% tend to be the folks that are quite a bit farther out. And so we will still build there. So we'll build to those places that are farther out, and we'll also incidentally, for the most part, we'll incidentally go into the places that are served. But our phase 1 is like, let's build a good, robust network that gets the most bang for the buck, and then finish the network later once we have the vast majority of folks connected.
Thank you.
Jeremy, this is Patty jumping in. Can you tell us about your RDOF position, and do you have one?
So we were part of an RDOF consortium. We were not a bidder. So Kingdom Fiber, Consolidated, and EC Fiber all won census blocks within CV Fiber territory. And these, and we are aware of these. I believe there's less than 1,000 premises in CV Fiber territory that are covered by these RDOF blocks. I don't have that number on hand right now. That I could ask David Healy. He maybe had that number or could run that report. But so no, we don't have that specifically, and we have been in discussions with Kingdom Fiber and EC Fiber about how to approach those census blocks within our district.
Okay, thank you.
David, this is Brian. On your slide, it looks to me in the little graphic at the bottom with area A, B, and C that you're going to break your build into, lack of a better term, construction zones or areas. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so when you go back to Laura's question about grant funding, do you need the full pre-construction? Do you feel like you need the full pre-construction amount for all zones, or is pre-construction for any given zone enough to keep you going on the ground and not run into delays because of funding gaps?
That's hard to say. I haven't gotten to that level of granularity, but the detailed engineering here, maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit. The detailed engineering we're expecting to do that essentially all at the same time.
Yep.
So, yeah, that detailed engineering, we're going to be, because we're hiring the same firm to do the detailed engineering as doing the high level design, we're going to expect to be doing now basically all of that all at once. And we
Okay, but
feel that
yeah, when you get over to construction, that makes perfect sense. I agree with that. When you get over to construction, where you're going to be sequencing this stuff a little differently, what I'm trying to get to is the larger the grant requirement, the more review and consternation it's going to get. If you can break it into bite-sized pieces, that's better. But I totally get your point about not having delays on the ground due to funding gaps. So I'm trying to figure out what the right balance between, if construction zones in phases that, like the construction phase, if the construction zone is the limit of a funding asks, oh my God, I can't even get it out now. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
How do we break this down in the most effective way? And if our construction zone is the way to do that once you pass pre-construction?
Yeah, so I think these areas A, B, and C, this is the way that we're approaching it. So as we're building, I mean, when we're expecting that these are going to be on different timelines.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we would be looking for construction money for area A first, followed by B, followed by C. Now, whether we can get to C using all grant money, that's to be determined, obviously.
Right.
So we will move on. We will hopefully be, securing funding for B before we get A done. That's my point, is that it's important to have these staggered, that we may not be able to say, okay, here are our final deliverables. Here's the thing that we completed before we then go into the next step. We would need to show that we are making affirmative progress towards the things that we promised for area A. And you should be able to look at this in a pretty concrete way. I mean, we should be able to take pictures and tell you how many people are signed up or how many people have service available, and while we are looking then at the next area. So I think that's a reasonable approach.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And last up, I believe Evan is presenting for Northeast Kingdom.
Hello, everyone. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Evan.
Carlson.
Yeah, sorry, introduction. Evan Carlson, NEK Bar Broadband Chair. We are a 50-town CUD, are planning to get to 55 at some point here. I believe everyone saw this slide or was presented with this slide last week, so I'm just going to kind of leave this here while I talk through some of the activities that have taken place as well as pre-construction needs. I'll try to be brief since I know we are over. So we completed our business plan in June, and this really outlined for us how we are going to reach the 33,000 addresses and 2,800 miles of construction to complete the network. We have about 20,000 or 17,000 underserved. This plan also laid out a phased approach for construction. We are doing essentially 4 phases and are going to be building across areas that include some of the state fiber assets and some of the Northlink fiber assets, and really trying to leverage those. We are also a part of the WEC network that Patty and Jeremy touched on earlier, so we are working to move that forward. Additionally, the business plan included a very clear picture from a financial perspective on how we were going to build this network, and highlighted the capacity building needs as well. The other item that we're kind of going through right now, we're finalizing a contract for construction management with Mission Broadband, who will be driving some of the Concord Waterford project that was funded through CARES last year, and expecting to light that up later this year. We are selecting a pulse survey vendor to do the pulse survey across the municipal electric areas as well as the WEC territory. We are doing a detailed design, hopefully this fall, and that's going to. Did I cut out there for a second?
No?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Yeah. Detailed design, we're hoping to begin this fall, and that's really going to allow us to kick off construction in spring 2022. And that is certainly where we need funding more than anything else when we talk about pre-construction funding. I would say that we also are finalizing, while working through some negotiations with a couple of network operators, and expect to have one selected, I would say, in the next month or so. And we're very excited to announce that. So pre-construction needs from a funding perspective, we certainly need funding for further capacity building, being able to have a full-time executive director. We certainly have some funding for that now, but I think being able to continue that support into 2022 is going to be super important. The pre-purchasing of assets for construction in 2022, we know there's a delay in that, and that was a comment that I had made in the VCBB meeting last week. But I think that that's something that would be helpful for either the state to participate in, or to be able to make sure the CUDs have the funding ASAP to be able to do that. We also need to have our funding for the design and engineering, and that's going to be a pretty substantial amount of funding for us. And I don't know. That's I know there's some questions on what that looks like from the VCBB's perspective. So we have some thoughts there. The state, I think the funding needs from the sorry, I'm kind of all over the place here. The pre-purchasing of fiber, I think, utilizing the state's purchasing power will certainly be helpful if that's something that can be done, ensuring that the CUDs have the assets that they need in advance will speed this process up. And if possible, being able to issue an RFP for the purchasing of those assets. Talking about the design and the role that the VCBB might have, one thing that we feel might work well would be to have the VCBB help with the procurement of backhaul and being able to get any type of pricing discounts with backhaul providers to the CUDs. And then the potential of a consultant on staff that can help identify where the interconnection points make the most sense between the districts, and specifically looking at what the designs that the CUDs are producing and helping determine where higher count fiber should be considered at the kind of abutting borders of the districts. That seems like a role that the VCBB could play, rather than providing or dictating a kind of middle mile, last mile design for each of the CUDs. And I think this was mentioned last week, but it really potentially runs the risk of doubling the amount of work that needs to be done. If the state is producing a design and then each of the operators and CUDs are refining those designs again before they actually begin construction. Obviously, we're trying to move fast, and so doubling the work doesn't seem like it's going to add much value there. The question on RDOF, we have two groups of awardees in our region, Kingdom Fiber and Consolidated Communications. The thing that we're looking at doing is offering lit service to those providers across our network. We expect that we will be building probably quicker than some of the providers in the areas that were awarded. And that is all I have, so questions?
Questions, Laura?
Thanks, Evan. So I don't know if you heard our discussion earlier about the potential for pre-purchasing and the challenges that arise from, did you hear that discussion?
Yeah,
Do
it's
you have any
basically
comments
storage
about
and-
that?
You're saying for storage and for being able, the actual logistics of purchasing it?
Well, and also I think it was the type, right? So it's not all exactly the same. So, so I think the comment was made, well, if we were to do something like that, would you all want us to impose like, okay, and you'll be using this type of material?
Yeah, I think that there's not going to be any dispute on our end. I think when it comes to the actual fiber itself, there seems like there's going to be enough use between all of the CUDs that there's going to be an opportunity to use it. I mean, we talk about fiber counts. I think if you have a variety of different fiber counts available, and if the state wants to help define maybe what the kind of minimum fiber count should be for backhaul and middle mile, that to me makes sense. And there seems to be a role for the VCBB to play there.
So Patty, I mean, I'm really interested in us chasing this down as far as we can. I don't have the knowledge. I mean, I think some of you will.
Well, I think I'm compiling a list of, this might go into criteria or other areas, but that's one of them. And if the CUDs all agree, yeah, we'll take these 4 standards, then procurement can start. And, it might be a 6-month lead time. Whether or not the VCBB does that or another entity does that, but getting manufacturing space secured, I think, will be the important part. And then we have financial assurances that will have to go. Nobody wants to extend credit to somebody who's,
right.
so
Understood.
it's complex, but it's on my list.
I also did just receive an email from Chris Reschi at EC Fiber and says that they have an ability to potentially do that, or at least want to talk about it. So if we're done with NEK, that might be a good transition briefly.
Happy to.
I would just ask the CUDs, to the extent that you're able to kind of be even more specific together about what you mean when you say that. I think that will help us try and accommodate it.
And that should go into, for the CUDs that are engaging engineering companies to do high level and then detailed design, they would have to be part of that construct as well.
Can I ask a question? Would it be helpful for VCUDA potentially to provide a proposal on what the kind of fiber purchasing process might look like, or kind of what we would appreciate for purchasing?
I think that it would very much.
I think for all the CUDs, we should ask that.
Well, that's VQ.
Okay.
That's
Okay,
all.
I will plan to bring that to VCUDA.
It really is, that's.
That would be great, Evan. Thank you.
Okay.
Because if we can standardize, we know what we need to purchase, and then figure out the details
Yeah,
after.
let's see if we can standardize.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, to the
Yeah.
extent, right, to the extent we can,
Yeah.
that's.
Well, And the fact that some of the organizations have engineering or pre-engineering agreements out there already, I don't know what that does. Okay.
So we haven't heard from EC Fiber yet. Are we ready to quickly move to EC Fiber?
Is Chris
Yes.
sitting
They
next to
weren't
you
on the
right
list.
now? What's
Yeah.
that?
I wasn't sure if it's chickens or swings.
Children or chickens?
Yeah.
Those are chickens. I was gonna apologize. I was gonna apologize for that up front, but yeah, those are chickens and they're loud. I'm sorry. Nothing I can do about that. So do you all want me to weigh in at this point? I'm sorry. Okay, so first of all, I'm Chris Recchia, Managing Director of ValleyNet, which is a design, build, operate company for EC Fiber. We're actually partnering with GWI as well for the DV Fiber. Is anyone from EC Fiber on who was planning on doing a presentation on behalf of the CUD? I haven't seen that. So here's what I will do. I wanted to talk about the procurement piece briefly because that's where I have the most information. But let me just say that EC Fiber as an entity, we have 6,200 customers online right now. and we're pretty much finishing our build of the original 22 towns. We have Hartford still to do, which includes White River Junction and a bunch of pretty complicated areas. And then we have 8 new towns that we're pretty much in the same boat as the other CUDs on in terms of poll collection information, applying for licenses, developing those. The other piece that we have, which I would share with you in more detail if and when the board wishes to get into it, but it's kind of in the lessons learned department. Some of our original towns that we built, we kind of built them to people who wanted service and didn't design the whole town at the same time. And some of those are going to need to be rebuilt, frankly. Barnard comes to mind as one that really could stand that, and there are probably a couple of others. So that will go into a lessons learned discussion. But in terms of procurement, we anticipated that we were going to have problems, particularly with the RDOF auction around the country and all this additional attention to broadband, that we were going to have problems procuring materials. We have ordered all our materials for both Hartford and most of the new towns already, and we anticipate delivery this fall. But what I wanted to bring your attention to is there is a consortium of groups that are able to procure through Power Intel and Calix, and I'll talk about those in a second, advance ordering, where the consortium will store the materials and guarantee a delivery when you call them. They will guarantee the delivery within a week. So that may be an option that we can explore some more. We haven't had to use them because we've had such good direct connections with Power Intel and Calix. What I will say is I think that the ARPA funds, and Rob may know this better, but I suspect there's going to be a Buy American priority there. And we do try and do that whenever we can. But, you know, the reality is that even an American company that we buy from, like Calix, has manufacturing that's in China or elsewhere. So I think we have to probably explore that some more. But I guess I'll just stop there and say how any questions that I can be helpful with, or anything that we can do as ValleyNet to help facilitate your work, I'm happy to do that.
Laura. Yeah, thanks, Chris. So going back to the grant, you're on camera. Going back to the grant agreement.
Thank you. I'll stop smoking my cigar now. Sorry. Thank you for that. I appreciate that heads up. Yeah.
Sorry,
oh boy. Oh God.
That's okay. That's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you. I don't laugh enough. So
yeah.
So going back to the grant sizes that we heard from Jeremy, making sure that when we're awarding grants. So I know ValleyNet has and EC Fiber have a lot of experience in this realm. So when we're thinking about pre-construction and construction grant sizes, do you have an opinion about the sizes of grant awards that we should be thinking about, or the range?
Yeah, I do. I think for the poll collection and make ready, the poll collection is probably about 700 a mile. I expect all these prices to go up because we're all trying to do the work at the same time. But we've used poll collection at about 700 a mile, and make ready and design is going to be about 10,000 a mile. Overall, construction is, and you didn't ask about construction, but we have that's creeping up to about 35,000 a mile.
So when we think about, when you all are coming in, when we have a CUD coming in for a pre-construction grant, what should we be thinking about as
Yeah.
the minimum that they might need in order to meet Jeremy's question from earlier, you know, allow us to be able to keep moving.
Right. I suggest that because of that tension between bite-sized pieces as well as, you know, keeping the continuity going, I guess I would suggest that that the grants have the ability to have different sections for, you know, high-level design, pole collection, applications for make ready, as kind of separate line items. But I do think you're in the $1.5 million to $2 million range probably for each of these CUDs. I mean, I hope you all saw the NEK. That is extraordinary, right? The breadth of NEK and the number of miles to serve the number of residents in that vast area. I think from our business planning, we've shown that that's going to require some construction assistance beyond the bonding capacity. But the rest, I think, are similar enough to what we've experienced in EC fiber territory, that that grants to get this going to the point where then there's some capital available such that you can be attractive to the bond market is kind of the way we envision everybody kind of going. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I think the pre-construction stuff and, you know, getting to the point where you can start constructing fiber is probably a $2 million venture for each of these CUDs. That is a very rough estimate.
So 1.5 to 2 is, I think.
Yeah, with NEK being an exception, because that's a 20-year miles. We kind of estimated, I just did an extrapolation from CV Fiber's number. You know, if you extrapolate up from the 9.8% to the state level, we end up with 16.5 million. So I suspect with NEK's numbers in there, it's probably going to be close to about 20 million total for design.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right.
I should say we tried to address some of these issues. I know we're running behind schedule, but we do have a draft for review for the board that's still pending with Guidehouse and the state for approval of a potential RFP for the remainder of the pre-construction funds. We can talk through, but I know we are running.
Okay, any other questions?
Chris, this is Dan Nelson. What was your design cost per mile, please?
We kind of roll it in with the sorry, the chickens are extraordinarily loud at the moment. We kind of roll it in with the make ready application stuff, and we were estimating about 10,000 total.
Thank you.
Yep.
Chris, quick question for you on your is it Barnard that you have to rebuild?
Yes. Uh-huh.
What was the flaw there?
Well, so it wasn't a flaw per se. It was just the nature of how we started. Remember that we started with private equity. And what that meant was we were constructing out to people that wanted service and kind of offering service along the way to those that happened to be between point A and point B. But the reality is the way to do this right is to design the town all at once, which I'm not hearing any I'm hearing everybody saying they're doing that. But we did not get to, because we were kind of scrapping for funds. We had private equity, private investors who wanted service to their own houses. We had to build kind of piecemeal. And as a result, the overall system in the early days wasn't designed to necessarily have the right number of fibers or an organized way of getting from to everybody. And, you know, we've learned that over time, and we've certainly made adjustments and have more success now. But the reality is, in the beginning, we didn't have the money nor the penetration to be able to do that. So some of those towns earlier really aren't built with the right fiber numbers or direction to really provide that resilient link that we and rings that we look for. So that was really it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of Chris? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. I'm gonna insist that we do our break though.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm a marathoner, I can just keep going.
I can make that happen, but I have to make previous arrangements. No
Why
coffee.
don't we take a 10-minute break?
5 even?
At least,
10?
no more than 10.
Maybe competition for the bathrooms for the other meetings.
It's 10:50 now, so please be back by 11.
And where are the restrooms?
Oh, sorry about that. Right, so back outdoor down the hallway.
So I actually do not know how to pause the recording, so I will I'm gonna turn off the video for the meeting room and mute this, and we'll be back.
Who started the recording?
I did.
Rob, can I get back in the building?
Hold on
Where's it at?
hold on.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
give you-
Scott.
should say that we are unmuted. Okay, and then I'll turn the video back on.
Okay, it is 10:58. We are back. We are back to we're back to meeting.
Yeah, we're back in session, yeah.
Back in session. Thank you. Okay, so we've gone through the CUD updates. Is there any comment we want to have any follow-up discussion relative to the CUD updates?
Can we just confirm that people can hear us? I guess everybody might be muted. You can put up your hand if you can hear
Yeah,
us.
you're
Okay.
good.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's coming through here, not my computer. So.
Okay.
So that was some very meaty content, very helpful. Any further discussion, questions? Holly?
There are a number of references to business models that precede pre-construction or high-level design, and earlier funding that helped structure a plan. Part of our charge is to evaluate, I think, the sustainability of the proposals or the projects that are coming before us. And I just don't know what to do with the random references to, oh yeah, we have a business plan, and how we address the evolutionary part of these CUDs.
So there's two, yeah,
Absolutely.
there's two pieces of legislation. So Act 79 was from 2 years ago, which is what most of these guys have been operating on, and it had requirements to put together a business plan.
Yeah.
To do that. So I think that's, I don't know if that's the question.
No.
Okay.
In order to make grant agreements, it seems that we have to also be evaluating the business plan.
So,
And that is something that I think this group is going to need to figure out, like, are we evaluating a business plan before we spend more money?
Yeah, do you think, is that in the legislation? I'm not recalling that, but
So-
I could have just glanced right over it.
Here's the way, and I'm going to put this out there because WEC has put forward a business plan. WEC has done a feasibility study. So I'm somewhat operating in two worlds right now.
Yep.
And our fiber rollout is for electric purposes. Tangentially, it's for the benefit of internet service providers. So we have our vested interest is on the electric side to help us do some things electrically.
Of course.
Anyway, that said, we've done a feasibility study, business plan. That informs us and drives us to move us down the road. It could become part of a package that ultimately we file with, if we were applying, WEC is not applying, but if WEC were lining up to apply for funds from this board, that could be part of the story. But we need to develop discrete criteria, grant submission protocols, like here's our 20 pages of fill this out. And part of what that book report or requirement could be is that tell us if you've had a feasibility study. It's tangential documents that you would submit as part of our grant requirement. So I look at it as a body of work, not necessarily that stuff is required of everybody, if that makes sense.
Everybody's, or at least most of the ones I've heard, they're going to have some sort of pro forma financial projection, right? It's going to have miles.
Exactly.
It's going to have numbers, it's going to have take rate, it's going to have some assumptions about retail pricing. And unlike WEC, WEC's backstopped by a vibrant electric business. These CUDs are not. These CUDs are not backstopped by anything other than their pro forma, right?
And the reason why I'm concerned about it is because several times today we've heard, oh, well, we want to go out to the bond market and we need to establish sustainability, and our plan for that is to go into high take rate areas. Well, it isn't just high take rate areas, it's having a viable business. So I think, yes to the checklist.
Right, but that will be part of the body of stuff that is produced to say, this is why you should give us money.
Right, and it isn't just, did you do it, but rather, what did it say?
Right.
Yeah, and all the CUDs are very far along. Several are holding off on finalizing until they determine with their potential partner or operator, since that will influence a lot of what their overall model is. But
one other comment on this. Another reason why I care is because, Krista, could you mute? Another reason why I care is because we do have an affordability objective that's underlying all of this. I have an opinion about that. I don't want to bring it up here, but it helps us keep that on the
Right, that
checklist.
should be in this body of, grant requirement request. We're gonna say, if you want money from the VCBB, you have to fill this out. And part of that is how are you gonna fulfill this portion of the low income
Yeah.
requirements? That's what is in my head.
Same thing.
Right.
And maybe Brian, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go.
Well, something you said is how do we not block them and keep them going because they're on a run? If there was some standardized project schedule, like where are you? This is what it should look like. Your burn rate is, and you need this much capital at these milestones, that we can make sure we feed that and yet not give them $3 million today. We feed them appropriately as it goes.
Yeah, I think, I imagine something that looks like you're approving them for an amount, but the distribution of the amount will be milestone based. That shows that the ball's rolling in the right direction at the right pace.
Yeah.
And that as soon as they hit a milestone that says, yep, they're gonna make it, then boom, then you send the next distribution so that they can keep the activity going.
And in the draft RFP that we're going to review, that's one of the approaches that we took was where we established a cap. And then they would be applying within that cap, because I've heard from many of the CADs, it's hard to determine, it's hard to get to an operating agreement without knowing what you potentially have available to you.
Yeah.
So we can talk about the process and all of that if we want to go into the RFP, the high level, or I don't know.
I think we should move on to.
But I did cut off Laura when I added to my
One
comment.
quick question.
Yes.
So I think I'm aware that there's one CUD's feasibility study that came back that it was not feasible. Is there only one?
There is only one. There's one feasibility study that is still pending and being reviewed.
So then my question is there some comparison of the feasibility studies, of all of the feasibility studies? Just to go, I think, more to your question.
I don't know if such a comparison
Okay.
exists. They use a variety of different vendors. Some will be easier to compare than others.
So for benefit of staff, just to Dan's point, the narratives are great and it's nice to meet the CUDs, but I think we need to start benchmarking this out and have a format in which we track where people are and what they're doing. The narratives, we're not tracking anything specific.
Yeah, this goes to, I sent this in an email, but the concept of a maturity model is basically just you taking disparate organizations and just ranking them on a how mature are they in the evolution to their objective, right? So I'm going to say this, it's probably wrong. That's just an example, but I would say if we were to break all the CUDs into like a 3-tier maturity model, EC Fiber is going to be at the top. They have thousands of customers who pay their bills regularly. They know how to design, construct, support, and operate a network, a retail network. They're basically just in expansion mode now, but their core business model is proven and repeatable, right? And they're solvent. On the other side, you've got some CUDs that are just starting the journey that EC Fiber started 10 years ago. And so I think we also need to tune our grant process around where does each CUD fit in the maturity model, because some need more support than others, and that we should be in recognition of that. And the monies we award are riskier or less riskier depending upon where they are in their maturity model journey. So I think we need to spend some time doing that. And it's not a judgment on the CUDs. It's just a statement of fact of where they are in their evolution and how that aligns with responsible grant administration.
And making sure that we bring the tail end up.
Sure.
Remembering that these are largely community volunteer-driven
That's the goal.
organizations. So who needs more help to get to that place?
And that was the approach with the H315 funds, because it was pre-construction and capacity, and various groups needed more in terms of capacity. There was also a long process in terms of ensuring that they have the capacity for grant administration, which is what led us to the idea of the shared discussion, reviewing contracts and things like that. A lot of those were put into place for those types of safeguards. But I'm sure the CUDs would welcome, and I think they would agree with our assessment of where everybody is at.
A couple caveats on the feasibility studies. One, they were done before the RDOF areas were established. And two, beware of, saying, I'm aware of which study was said was not feasible. But of course,
There's something.
NEK is not feasible either without grant funding, And so there were different assumptions made in those feasibility studies. The assumption at NEK was, look, we know this is feasible because we're serving such a small area, but how much grant funding do we need?
Right.
You'll see in the NEK model, you can plug in the grant funding and see what it does in the time it takes to pay off the loan. So that, that's why we exist, because the feasibility isn't there.
And the feasibility studies, probably most of them were done before even the ARPA funds were here either, which is a game changer in terms of feasibility.
So
right?
I think it's a safe bet to say that if they were found feasible before the ARPA funds, they're definitely feasible now. I think.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Molly, did you have something you wanted to say?
None. We can keep going.
All right, we are 10 minutes after 11 and 11:09. Shall we jump over to pre-construction program?
Great.
Sure, you should all have copies of this.
If anyone
Is this
doesn't have a
ahead
copy.
of time, or are we just seeing this right now?
We're just seeing this now.
Great,
This is
that's fine.
just as a little bit of background on process. When 71 was signed, the Department of Public Service was given the ability to allocate up to $20 million in funds via the pre-construction program. We were unable to get an RFP approved. There was various legal review that went through with the RFP, and the state has a whole system for reviewing anything connected to ARPA funds. We are still waiting for the final go-ahead to even be able to release the RFP. So this document that you have and that we'll put up on the screen momentarily and have in a board packet is a draft for discussion. So it's not just us making changes. We may have finance and management coming back requiring various changes as well. So that's the history on that. One other piece of history is H315 provided $1.6 million for pre-construction and capacity. That has been exhausted, and you heard many of the CUDs speak about that already. Almost all of those grants are fully executed.
How much was that?
1.6 million. You also heard mentions of delays. When it comes to federal funds and the record keeping and financing, there was various steps in terms of insurance, in terms of the federal DUNS number and SAM number, all these technical things that I will be thankful when I don't have to deal with. But it was really getting everyone's ducks in a row to make the process a lot smoother as additional funding goes out the doors. There were some challenges with CUDs where they changed their address or changed their names or various other different things that held the process up a little bit. The grant agreements also underwent a legal review by the legal staff at the Public Service Department, which delayed those being able to be issued. But it was all done to get us in a better place to be able to move things out the door, at least in terms of trying to reduce some of that type of bureaucracy and to focus more on the deliberative side of things of what should be approved, what shouldn't be approved, how we go about that. So that's just my mea culpa in terms of the delay of all the delays. So this was the first draft of this was probably written in June, but let me put it up on the screen so everybody at home can see this. And there's just a few things that we should focus on. Sorry, this may take a moment to find this because.
So can I ask a question? Ken?
Absolutely.
So then, as I'm starting to read through this looks like it was work done in advance for us that we now are having the opportunity to edit.
Okay.
Yes, because initially we thought this was going to be out before the board was even created.
Gotcha.
Which is great. So we're not starting from
Right.
complete.
So it was changed to being where it's the board issuing it and various other items in terms of reporting, in terms of everything were switched to being as if this could be used for the board.
And this is intended to be a RFP, which is essentially setting the framework for all pre-construction grants,
Yes.
which we're not going to be asked to act on today because we're just getting it right now.
That's up to the board to decide.
Okay. And how, of the CUDs, how many of them have already received or passed pre-construction? Any of them? Except
Everybody has
EC fiber.
Even EC fiber has pre-construction needs for their new towns. So everybody needs, for the initial $1.6 million program, I believe I don't have the exact number, it was close to $9 million in requests. Well oversubscribed. So it's been, admittedly, the CDs will certainly say it's been a bit of a holdup, but they also understand that the board needs to get stood up and needs to take an interest in this as well. So it's kind of this whole balancing act that we keep talking about.
Yeah, let me add to that. This reconstruction grant doesn't commit the board to anything. This is really to get the money in our account. So ultimately, once this is approved, we get it in our account, we allocate it.
Well, using this
Using this RFP.
Yeah, but we can.
I don't buy that. Yeah.
We had to provide a draft RFP to the administration and Guidehouse for review to make sure that it's in compliance with all the ARPA Treasury guidelines. There can be some changes after that, but it's more of there can be back and forth once the initial program is approved, and that gets us access to the funds that were appropriated.
Sorry, can I ask a silly question? What's Guidehouse?
Sorry. Guidehouse are one of the consultants that review all appropriations from first from the CRF funds, the coronavirus relief funds, and now from the American Rescue Plan to ensure compliance.
It's government.
It's consultants that the administration.
Who are they working for? The feds?
Exactly.
Who are giving those?
No,
money?
it's working for the state.
So the state has engaged them. Does Guidehouse have a relationship with all 50 states for this, or just Vermont that we know?
They work with many different states, but it's certainly not all 50. They're just one of the premier companies that has been reviewing different.
But just to
different
reiterate,
programs.
so they're there to protect us that we've checked all the boxes for the federal funds and we're not going to mess up.
Yes,
It's that simple.
but sometimes it does take some time. Like everything. So that's this is the draft that was shared with them.
They already have it.
Change. They already have it.
And how long have they had it?
Oh,
Early June, right?
There's been a back and forth over whether they want to approve the $150 million program by program or the entire $150 million appropriation. They've now had this version of the grant for several weeks now. And I believe we're hoping for some type of approval next week. So we couldn't issue this today, even if we wanted to. But we can move towards if we want to make additional changes to this today and start setting up the time frame. We thought it was a good point to start the discussions at.
Okay, so let me make sure I follow this, because this is the requirements we're going to attach to the CUDs. This isn't the RFP that we submitted to the governors.
This is part of the package that we had to submit.
Okay.
But as part of that package, we had to submit what we were going to be issuing when we issue our requests for proposals, our requests for grant applications. So this is the very, very draft version of our request for grant applications from the CUD for the pre-construction program.
Can I ask a question? You submitted a package to the governor's office? You just talked about it?
Yes.
What is that?
It's a questionnaire for the use of any of the funds.
Okay.
And we're supposed to attach any RFPs that are in draft form for them to also review so they can get a better understanding of the programs.
Oh. It's just like this board is attached to all that stuff and we just don't know about it. That's all.
Yeah, we could provide you copies of that.
There's
We will provide you copies.
Right, think about it. It's like we're jumping on a train. It's already moving.
And unless we can see the cars, we can't jump.
Yeah,
Some of us will be more methodical about how we jump and others just jump.
And that gets to what really I've been working, and we should have it within 2 weeks. I really want to have a place where all these documents are kept and you have access to them.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
We're working on it. We're in talks to figure out the whole website and want to get stuff up there for a variety of reasons sooner than
Right, that
sooner than later, but-
transparency is huge. So
Yes.
it's like, okay, if I'm a grant applicant, I want to go to a website and tell me what to do. What are all the things I have to do? Lay out exactly what I have to do, and then I go forth and fill out all because it's a lift. Filling out grants is a big work project.
I fully agree. We just have been not able to release this until we got approval, but we felt that it was
Understood.
necessary to discuss amongst the board. I'm
Absolutely.
in a public meeting. So that's why I
Absolutely.
don't send me applications yet based on what you see in here, please.
Right. This is something to poke at and poke holes at, which is helpful.
Exactly, so.
Well, process-wise, I mean, will we approve this?
I think,
Hey,
We will approve this, right?
Is that not,
Yeah, so-
is that your expectation as the
I
executive?
don't think, we're
We
not
can't know
expecting
that.
approval today.
Right,
Yes,
eventually.
We will be looking for your approval.
Okay,
So
okay.
the next question is, okay, what is the process to go through this? Are you gonna do just walk us through, or you're expecting us to make changes?
No, we're gonna give you an overview now. You take it back with you and you can send those recommended changes to me. And, we'll present it at the next meeting.
Yeah, we'll get
This
electronic.
is a-
We'll get electronic.
yes,
This is called draft one.
Excellent.
yeah. This is go-
And you'll send it in
Even
Word
though it's
format so
been
we
out
can
to
track
guidance.
edits?
I will send it in
Yeah.
Word so you
Excellent.
can track edits. This is more just to give you an idea, because it's a lot of the things that we're talking about with pre-construction and
Excellent.
allocating funds and stuff are addressed in here. So I want to make sure that we're on the right track. I feel like
Okay.
we were close, but once again, this was developed before the board was,
Exactly.
so.
Even before Act 71.
No, it's what this.
No.
No, not before Act 71. But it was developed right after Act 71 was passed, since we were going to have access to, in the interim, we were expecting to have access to a certain amount of funds to get out the door to keep things moving, but that access wasn't provided because of trying to make sure that we're all on track when it comes to the use of these federal funds, which is a worthy goal for everybody in the state. So. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of it fast. Some of it is just a lot of background of what it's funded by. It's funded by Act 71, became law June 8th, all that. A disclaimer about the American Rescue Plan Act, that the Treasury guidelines are still preliminary. It's very clear in that they are allowed to be used for broadband, especially at this speed. But that disclaimer has to be on there that if additional guidelines come out, it may impact the administration of the program.
Quick question. So do I have it right that the funds can only be issued to CUDs
Yes. Yeah,
For
thank you.
pre-construction,
Yes.
just for that step?
just for pre-construction.
Yeah.
Oh,
Construction funds are open to, we can get into that when we talk to that, but you'll see when I talk about some percentages, it's based on just for CUDs, which is one of the other reasons why when we're talking about pre-construction, it was, you weren't hearing from the other providers, you were hearing from the CUDs. So we set aside $30,000 was what was, $30 million was what was discussed. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, many times that when the legislation was being drafted, when it was put into the budget bill, it was all lumped together as one appropriation. But that
So
is
this
one
is-
area that,
This is a choice,
so this is a choice. So this is for the entire program,
pre-construction.
pre-construction program.
Is it enough for pre-construction? Because unlike construction, which they can bond for, they can't bond for pre-construction, right?
That is correct.
Yeah,
2
we believe
million,
that's enough.
2 million times 9 CUDs.
Well, no, it's two,
Well,
no, not quite, but about 20, based on the numbers we had today, we're looking at about 20 million total for design. So then, then there'll be make-ready costs on top of that, but we think 30 million is enough.
Pre-construction include actual make-ready costs?
I believe in the
Yeah.
definition
Yeah.
that it does. That's what I
And-
wrote.
We should be explicit about that.
We need to define it.
Okay, so we need to define pre-construction more. Okay,
Well, I think Brian's question is an important one, is does it include the make-ready cost versus putting that in the construction cost?
Yeah, is it the survey costs or is it the actual
Right.
get on the pole and make the room?
That's a good question.
It's a good question,
I don't know
something that we
yet.
should spell out
It may be the
explicitly.
survey
And I
cost.
think,
Or is it up to us to define?
yes.
So the Act 71 also talks about an equitable distribution of funds under this program, as well as encouraging collaborative work among the CUDs. And we worked to establish a formula. We tried several different versions of a formula to figure out how to allocate these funds based on the number of towns, number of unserved addresses. We did different variables for including or not including RDOF addresses. The results came out very similar because of the amount that we're looking at, but get in there. I'll get to that. And we'll talk about this when we go into the numbers. So we talk about how there's approximately 60,000 locations without access to broadband. We talk about locations with a plan. So these are locations that were either funded via the 2020 Connectivity Initiative. We only counted wired locations. RDOF locations that are wired, we did not include SpaceX. We will discuss later on about whether those should be, how those should be counted, because they're not funded at 100%. So that's.
But they're not part of the definition of universal service in the legislation either. So they're not to be funded. SpaceX or wired.
SpaceX, yeah, SpaceX ones are not. SpaceX ones are counted towards the numbers for each district.
Say that again?
So I mean, so what? Let me back up to determine. I'm gonna actually let me scroll down here because this will be what people want to see.
I'm gonna give you a pause and say to everybody that under the discussion of pre-construction definition, the pre-construction grant program is defined in 8085, section 8085, and there's a whole list of things, including pool data surveys, engineering design, and make-ready work associated with construction of broadband, legal, administrative, consultant, other costs, and there's an obligation of the board to make sure the awards are scalable.
Okay.
8085, I commend it to you.
So as I said, we'll have to discuss how we want to count RDOF addresses. What I did in terms of determining the percentage of unserved premises out of the total number of premises for all the CUDs. So this isn't statewide, just to be clear, because the pre-construction program is only open to communication union districts. So I took the base 2019 data. We subtracted the RDOF locations that were funded, the wired RDOF locations that are funded at 100 by 100. There's a big asterisk there that many of those were only funded at 20, 30, 40% that we will discuss when we talk about the data. We deducted the connectivity initiative projects that were funded. Once again, only the wired ones. We also deducted, there was 2 supplemental grants to the CUDs to build out in Concord, and then Moortown, Roxbury, and Northfield. Those addresses were subtracted. There was also some charter addresses that didn't make it into the 2019 data that were subtracted. So I'll walk you through that process again in the next section. But then we took the percentage, and that's the percentage broken down by CUD.
Of the total after you take out all those other things.
Yes.
That's what's left of unserved and underserved.
Yes.
So that won't, if I added that up, that's 100% of the remainder, but not 100% of un and underserved.
It's 100% of the remaining locations in CUDs.
Yeah.
So, and as you heard from Jeremy, Waterbury is likely to be accepted today. We have to figure out when we do a cutoff. There's various moving target challenges with this. So that's why I say estimated cap. That cap I figured out based on the $30 million. I tried a variety of different things. The amounts were very, very similar, like within a percentage of breaking it down.
I don't understand that column, estimated amount.
So the estimated amount we took, if we have $30 million is applied to the program. The percentage of that is what that number is.
I gotcha.
So it might be a tiny little bit off since some of the calculations that we did last night were slightly different, but it's also rounded.
So it's just straight math on the percent of un and underserved.
Straight math and some rounding.
Right. Okay. So for example, any K could make an argument that if you're not going to incorporate line miles into this, it's without any sort of weighting, like it's not equitable, right? I'm just projecting here.
Oh yeah, no, it's going to be a challenge and something that's gone back and forth with the CUDs of whether there should be whether RDOF locations should be counted but discounted, whether we should have a multiplier for density. And in the back and forth between all the CUDs, what we found is that the numbers are really darn close. And there's so many different variables. Like if you're counting road miles, well, what class roads are you counting? What are you doing about cable there? Makes it an incredibly complex calculation.
Sure.
There's already a lot of complexity in here with RDOF locations since the feds didn't use E911 addresses, so they had to be matched. So there's a lot of, we have to accept that there is a margin of error with this. The 2020 data that the department will come out with won't be out till probably October or later in the year. So we want to be more specific when we're talking about construction. When it comes to pre-construction, we didn't think that some of those other possible variables were as important to consider.
Good point.
So it's trying to, we stuck to keep it simple in the end, and it's still not very simple.
And have you gotten feedback from the CUDs on this?
We've gone back and forth on a lot of it. This is the first time they're seeing this chart,
Okay.
but there has been discussion, and we've worked with David Healy at CB Fiber on this, and they're trying to figure out. Everybody wants to come up with the perfect model, and I think there's a general acceptance that we don't want to make finding the perfect model be the enemy of getting this done. Because we could talk about this for the next 6 months and not do anything. There's a note included in here about potential, like why we would adjust this. Towns may join or switch CUDs. We already have towns that are shared half and half. For the sake of simplicity, I just divided the numbers half and half for the locations. We could do it point by point, but at this point, it seemed like for pre-construction, that's one thing. There might be other time-sensitive opportunities. Groups may work together. We may come up with a different one, a different formula. Better data might be available. But there are a lot of things that could change this, and these are areas for the board to make decisions.
You may have said this, but are there unserved or underserved addresses outside of this chart?
There are in towns not served by CUDs.
I'm sorry.
Pre-construction funding is only open to towns served by CUDs.
And I think you said this, but I'm just not clear. Can you scale that? Like, how big is that number on a percentage or some? Or just
we'll get to when we look at I have the breakdowns for statewide later on when we talk about the data numbers. So why don't we pause on that?
Okay, thank you.
Rather than jumping around.
Just note on the note section, there's no number 2. There appears to be duplication in 1.
Well, there you go.
Towns may join or switch CUDs. Towns may also switch CUDs. So.
Okay. No, thank you for that. And so like a decision point is like, do we update the numbers every time a town joins a CUD, or do we set a cutoff? There's also things that could change this. Is we know that one CUD is going for an application through NTIA for a broadband construction grant, community broadband construction grant. If they get that and they're entirely served, well, this is going to shift the formula since those are addresses we no longer need to worry about. There's also challenges since a lot has been, I don't know, a lot is put that in quotes. Addresses have been served not just through state programs between the 2019 data and what we have right now. Like you heard from Chris that EC Fiber has built out quite a bit. There's been other projects around the state. So there's some uncertainty in this, and that's why we did the percentage and what like feedback on it's not in here yet is rather than saying that this is a cap. I don't want a CUD requesting their entire cap.
Yeah.
So maybe setting a limit on what could be requested. There's going to be check points along the way in distributing those funds, but to allow for some of that flexibility as we get more information. So this is a cap. We'll be submitting proposals for specific items. The cap is just to give them an idea of what they have to work with in this, what's available right now to help them in their negotiations with partners.
All those numbers, I can't do it in my head. Do those all add up to 30 million?
Thank you for bringing that out. One other thing I did with this, in order to keep with this equity thing, is I subtracted the grant amounts that we funded via H315. So the percentage is actually out of 31.6 million. Thank you for catching that. Just to make sure, because the nature of some of the requests, like you couldn't, if it's a $200,000 design project, you can't really break that up. So it's proved a little challenging. So this was to make it another step.
But did you mean you added in?
We started with 31.
I started with 31.6 million, and I subtracted the awards that each CUD got.
And then that's what's left here?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So, Patty, when we're talking about baseline, that's that middle column that we want, right? I mean, is that?
Well, that's part of it.
Among CUDs, that's a baseline.
The one thing that I would question is that we're not doing this based on utility plant road miles. And I'm thinking of, the overwhelming scope of the NEK broadband project, for example. There are density issues here that are going to be significant, and the definition pre-construction includes make ready. So I do wonder about whether that has to be factored in.
Good point. I'd like to get CUD feedback on that before we render judgment. I think it's a really good point. Any case an outlier, maybe in our definition, I think make-ready surveying, a little more expensive. If make-ready actual doing the work on the poles is in there, that's a different deal. Because that's bucks.
So that definition's going to mean a lot to this.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing is I want to know, so GMP and VEC have put out make-ready tariffs to make this affordable to the unserved, right? It's not going to be all these locations, but it's going to be the hardest to reach and the most unserved. And if they need to be showing us in those in the applications what they've learned and what value they can bring through those channels to supplement this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And we have a map of some of those locations that I'll show you in the next section too.
So if I can just take that a step further, I guess maybe a layer of transparency deeper, because it sounded to me like at least one of the proposals involved maybe a partnership, and the make-ready costs might be darn near zero. So that level of transparency of what the GU is offering, and maybe an incumbent might be partnering, or who knows.
So these are all things we want to know in the grant applications, yes. And we'll get to
And
that.
that's
There's
in
a
the
whole
grant
long things
application.
that we want to, that we'll have to consider as we review them, and we're going to want them to tell us about. So,
And in your matrix, it'll help us weight those favorably.
so let me get to what we're asking for in the proposal. But let me just say first, we want to still do the 50% upfront, and then as expenses and reimbursement. The feds certainly prefer it being all reimbursable, but we recognize that they can't with it as here. So that's what we settled on. That's what we've been doing for the 315 pre-construction funds. So this was the process. So we want to keep the door open. This was another way of encouraging CUDs not to try to estimate all of their costs for the next year and a half and just apply for what they would like to apply for. So it'd be rolling after whatever the initial deadline has, that the executive director or executive director and staff, or however we want to work this, will do the first review of the applications, and then the board would vote to approve the applications at the next board meeting. Would be the goal. We can put other steps in there if we want, and we as an entity, we should determine how much time we need. So you're not getting something the night before, for instance. That's what happens when we have a board meeting 4 days apart. So the elements of the proposal, some of this is just the basic stuff that we need for the federal grants. The narrative is the key. And this is where, I've had many conversations with the CUDs of, we want someone to be able to read this that doesn't know as much of the backstory to be able to objectively evaluate these proposals. That's something I have struggled with, where I have so much communication that I know the day-to-day, I know what is happening there. But as it was described to me as we were going through the grant agreements and coming up with the grant agreements, this needs to be something that if God forbid it ended up in front of the judge would understand what was supposed to be done. So to be very clear on that we want a lot of background information. And we can, I think that we might want to be very specific, and maybe even add attachments of attach your feasibility study, attach your business plan. Exactly. Things like that, so that you all have all the information that is necessary when reviewing these applications.
So are we assuming that when a CUD makes an application that for the pre-construction grant, that the scope of their application will cover all the pre-construction activities to reach, incorporating all the underserved locations remaining in their footprint?
They should explain that.
Okay.
They should explain that. Like I said, in phase one, but different CUDs have it set up in different ways. So that is going to be a challenge. There also might be circumstances where, okay, they signed an agreement with an operator or design, build, construction for the whole thing, and they need to have some certainty.
Yeah, we just need to be really clear about, because the way I think about it, each CUD's got a quota. Those are the number of locations that need to be reached. They're the facilitators of making that happen. We're making funds available, and I want an accounting for how many of those they're going to reach in with this pre-construction work and funding. And if there are any that are not in there, I just want to know why they're not in there and where are they?
I'm so glad you said that. It's almost like, that's the report card for
This
the
is math.
COD.
This is
Yes,
math,
yeah, it's a
right?
numbers game.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
there are also some factors of like, you might not, there's reasons for and against doing all of your poll collection now versus
No,
breaking into part one and part
Absolutely,
two.
Al, and that's
for
their
instance.
business.
Yeah.
But I want to know what we're going
Agreed.
to get for what we're funding.
Well, and another thing to say about that is we should be allocating pre-construction and later construction funding based on what their service obligations are. In other words, they've got to get those under and unserved addresses addressed.
Yeah.
So they might not be able to pull down on a grant for the full amount now, but we should know what their run rate is. We should know what they have left to serve, and we should have pre-construction grants available for that. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, we're on the same page.
Okay, sorry, let me just disable.
We just can't ever lose track of the math because it's math,
That's right.
right?
And we can't say, oh, you went 5 million to do it this much, and then 6 months down the road go, oh, wait a minute, we've spent it.
Right, and we haven't fulfilled.
Yeah. My biggest concern overall here, and it's my experience, is that, you can't get this money back.
No.
And so it has to be really well thought out.
Right. And there's a lot of questions.
Not that you aren't thinking it out, you are. I'm just saying it out loud.
That's what this does. It maps out, have you thought about this? And it proves to us, their response will prove to us if they have adequately thought it out.
Right.
Exactly. And it's like, I want them to think about, okay, the status, the urgency, collaboration. Like, I want them to be thinking about all of these necessary things to ensure that we're building the best and cheapest, not cheapest, best,
Most valuable.
most valuable. Thank you.
I actually don't think that urgency is an appropriate category here, because everybody wants service, so all of it's urgent. I think it's about what the gating factors are, like, we need to go to do this by this date, so what are the
Yes.
gating issues?
That's what I was referring to.
And, it's also very tempting to say that everything should be the cheapest, but I actually have seen that go quite awry.
Right.
So let's be careful about that.
No, thank you. I think the Barnard example is a key thing to remember. So the cheapest is certainly the wrong word there, but the most valuable and effective, efficient, sustainable, strategic, all those other
All those
wonderful
good
words.
things, yeah.
So urgency may be based on the maturity of that CUD, where they are. Because if we're trying to bring some up and you've got the leaders, they're on track, we might need to spend a little effort.
Yeah.
And that was one of the other reasons why I wanted to have some kind of formula for a cap to make sure we don't get to a point of where, oh, all the pre-construction money is done and we still haven't managed to lift all boats. So that was one of the other reasons there. One thing in here we were trying to figure out how to address is, so with the construction, any overbuild of cable has to be, I don't know if it's incidental was the word, I can't remember what the word was used in the legislation, but just asking them to address that question head on, even though this isn't construction, but it plays into what's eventually going to be a construction proposal. Demonstration of commitment to universal service. So there's a lot of different things in there. Is there anything missing?
I guess spend time with it. You got to send this out
Okay, sure.
electronically.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm not even sure about F.
So-
I need to think about that.
One question I have is, do you feel that every CUD has the administrative capacity to manage this, or
Good question.
access to funding to provide the administrative capacity to provide this? Because that's something I think we have to make sure.
Or are
We're
we
gonna- We can do the
expecting
math.
staff to help?
We're going to get to this when we talk about reporting and administration. This is where it's going to come to a decision point. I do believe that all the CUDs have the capacity between themselves and the consultants and the work we've already funded to meet this criteria. In terms of the grant administration criteria, that is something that we need to discuss. And I think Christine said it great at the last meeting of like, what is value added for these groups and what isn't? What can we take off their plate? And centralizing some of the grant administration side of things is one model that we're exploring and starting to have some additional conversations with, and that we've received very well, it's been very well received by the CUDs who would love to be able to focus on their network rather than some of the other stuff that comes with the federal reporting. It would also build in more accountability if we're dealing with one entity that is overseeing the funds in some ways at the other level.
And I think part of this is developing, we'll do as a board, we'll develop the key performance indicators that show how effective these funds are being used. So we can have them reporting, the CUDs reporting based on some key performance measures that tie into our goals. Then we can handle the bureaucracy of the grant side.
Yeah, and it's like we're having conversation, I think this week with the Northern Borders Regional Council, a regional commission, and they have an arrangement where for their grants that don't go to state entities, that the local development district, the LDC or LDD, takes on the grant management side of things that we want to learn a lot more about. And that might be a model where it's at a little bit of arm's length from us, but we also know the reporting is all going to come back in one form, and that there's accountability built in, which could make our lives easier when it comes to our federal reporting, build in accountability and take something that is all the CEDs will say they never expected to spend this much time on dealing with this type of stuff.
Is there a space where VCUDA can help here? Like, should we be funding something there for that consortium? And
Yeah,
I think so.
I think so. Because I'm concerned about we pay it's like the fox in the hen house kind of problem, right? We
So-
pay the contractor who's working for them to tell us that they're doing a good job. Yeah.
That's like VCUDA, like one of the grants we did fund was for VCUDA to hire a program administrator, or I can't remember how we framed it, but to be able to help with those tasks so that they could be the partner we need them to be for this effort, and represent all of the CUDs. So this could be an expansion on that, since it's a shared goal of everybody.
Shifting some of your coordinating work. maybe.
eliminating some of the overlap, and this goes into process flow of like who's doing what and how we glue all these pieces together.
Like potentially we could, this is something we'd have to figure out, but if there is that entity that's established, I'm going to actually pause that thought because it needs to be thought out a lot more.
Yeah, I think we should.
But it's an area that we want to look into because it's on the next page here. We wanted to know about their financial controls and grant management plan, because this has been something that they are volunteer organizations. We're asking a lot of them. And we want to be sure that these funds are managed effectively, the reporting is done effectively, and that these groups are focusing on their communities, not on the numbers game and the reporting game.
Well, and just to put a finer point on it, if we look at this partnership arrangement that a lot of people, having served on the board of EC Fiber, it would be natural for ValleyNet to be managing the grant administration by which they are paid.
Right.
Too much of a circle.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we'll have to.
I'm not saying that they do that just for the Ethernet. I'm just saying that we have to watch for that.
Yeah, this is where it comes into like, what is the grant management plan,
And the
or if we could
auditing.
take that. Yeah, because there's going to be a single audit required. That's something that could be jointly contracted among all the CADs to take it off their plate, for instance. There's a lot of different things.
I'm concerned about the time and making sure that we know when we're going to be meeting again. It feels like there's a lot that we need to.
Okay, we will break at 12 for public comment, not break. Wherever
Okay.
we are in terms of this, that's a time certain, 12 o'clock
Okay.
for public comment. We
Okay.
respect that for 12 to 12:15. Then maybe after the public comment, we talk about next
Schedule.
steps and next meetings.
Okay.
But this will go out
And executive session.
This will go out electronically, and we'll make sure this is all posted as well, so the public can access it now that it is out for discussion. So really quickly, activities and budget for each item, detailed project timeline, tasks, milestones. This is something we added for the reporting for 315, but we'd rather them think about it in advance. Included right in there. This is one of the other reasons why they could use support. On the list of all the policy requirements that apply to the listing, just the CFI requirements, not even all the Treasury guidelines. You want to get volunteers to run away, just send them this.
Free money is not free.
Exactly. attachments, there's a whole list of assurances. There's the state fiscal recovery, additional assurances that we'll want to have a lawyer look over that just go into some of the other reporting. So reporting requirements, lined up the reporting to match with all the federal reporting that we have to do, and hearing from the CUDs that originally it was the 30th, but they might not get their stuff from their bookkeeper until after the 30th. So this was just contract review. This is something that we instituted for the 315, where we wanted to make sure each contract had a time frame, that had a very clear expectations of goals, that it was using standards. Can talk more about that if we need to, but it was just another place put there. For this one, I put an interim report and presentation in there. We could also potentially ask them to present to us before we approve. We might have some challenges with figuring out what's confidential and what's not. This is where we need a general counsel. We can issue a stop work order if things are going off the rails, but through an intense reporting regimen, we are going to know, which is really important. Final report, contract review. So this just stays what I was talking about there, following all the wonderful guidelines. And checking the stuff is another role that, whether it's a grant administrator or administrative assistant or whatever, would be a role for them to play, especially if it's someone that has a lot more fine-tuned knowledge of this than I do. The board, and then the review criteria, and this is where I'm expecting a lot of different input from all of you and hoping for it. So we have strategy and process. Well, how are you going to do this? Like, tell us the plan. We want to know if that plan aligns with what our understanding is of where the cut is at. Are they being advised by professionals? Like, yeah, these are volunteer groups, but these are all groups that have, since their inception, have been working with consultants that are incredibly knowledgeable about this and have boards that are very well informed. But we want to make sure it's more than checking that box. It's making sure that it is in alignment. Is it going to bring things closer to a partnership? Does it promote key legislative goals in Act 71? There's other things that can be added in here, and this is where I would appreciate even more feedback to build this out, because we do need more of a defined process for evaluating the applications, especially with this larger pool that we're dealing with now. Some of the stuff is very standard, make discussions without further discussion, negotiating, terms and conditions. This is all whatever. I'm not going to go through standard attachment C for the sake of everybody, but I am going to go to one other thing that we want feedback from the board, and that we should have our attorney review. This is all stuff we can't change. State fiscal recovery. I'm sorry, I'm get to it. So additional assurances. This is something else that we would like a lawyer to review. This was more asking the CUDs to check the box, so to speak.
No, that's not part of what we've been handed here.
Yeah.
But that's not in there. Okay, I'll make sure that the whole thing is posted. We didn't want to, you saw the pages I went through, we didn't want to print. So it's like part one is confirmation of financial monitoring controls. This might not be necessary if we do come up with a system where it's all going through a different entity. But in the meantime, it might be. Uniform grant guidelines saying that, okay, if you don't have these skills internally right now, attach all your policies for procurement, all that fun stuff. If some of the CUDs are working with their regional planning commissions already to handle this, where there would be this expertise when it comes to some grant management. Want to make sure that they've looked at the uniform grant guideline. This was more of just trying to give a roadmap for the groups to look at what's involved, because there's no such thing as free money, and there are a lot of conditions placed on this federal money.
Is the uniform grant guideline a state thing or a federal thing?
It's a federal thing. It's that footnote that I showed you that I said would make volunteers run away. That's that footnote. And this is all in the Treasury guidelines of what needs to be followed within those uniform guidelines. This has been the story of my summer of trying to understand incredibly complex things that are a challenge, and it's been a challenge to explain them to the CUDs, but it's something that needs to happen, and why I'm all for the idea of taking some of this off of their plate. That's not obvious. Other conditions, where is it here? That are specific to broadband infrastructure funded with state fiscal recovery funds. It's the ARPA funds. What's required? So it has to do with speeds, has to do with overbuilding, some basic stuff. So this is something that we want to work on more and then have a legal review of this. This would normally be in the grant agreement, but I wanted it in the RFP so the groups know what they're getting into. So that's a lot, and I know we're at time, but
Should this be pulled from Guidehouse until the board has input?
we can still make changes to it. Guidehouse is trying to approve the entire appropriation to us, and a lot of that work has been done previous. We would just be in communication with them once we have an initial approval if there are large changes that are going to be made on this. So this was written to try to check all the boxes of the things that they're looking for, and there's a questionnaire process that has to be filled out, and it's
I get it.
you get it. Look at the finance and management website. You'll see everything. So
I just didn't want them to push back that, no, you can't change this because we've already reviewed it.
they may suggest some changes that we're going to have to integrate as well. This is one of those areas where I don't want to say we're not the final say, but in terms of accessing them, they hold the purse strings. So, and it's certainly up to the administration of whether they follow exactly what Guidehouse says or provide flexibility. It's all about risk. Like, we don't think these programs are that risky based on what we've read with the Treasury guidelines and how broadband infrastructure is very explicitly spelled out. But we want to be sure these are taxpayer dollars. So, and we only have so many of them.
Nobody's going to disagree with you.
I hope not. So, well, let me stop sharing. Would you like me to stop sharing the screen at this point? We can discuss and figure out where we're at.
I am fine with that. Does anybody want to keep it up? Okay, we are good. So our takeaway, our homework is to review this. And the next question will be, when do we need to turn around comments back? And I think that's going to be driven by when our next meeting.
Yes, and timing. We would come to an agreement of how soon ahead of the meetings you would like the information. And, we'll make that discussion after the public comment, set up timelines.
So why don't we move to public comment then, and then we'll circle back around and deal with meeting schedules and executive session. Okay? All right.
So
we are presently not doing the item at 10:15 and haven't addressed the baseline data.
Exactly. But there are going to be some holdovers to the next meeting. There's no way we're going to complete everything today.
I think we're going to need to refine our agenda building process a little bit.
Yeah, we're going, right now, we're going 100 miles an hour.
Yep.
So it's not.
Building the plane.
Exactly. We're flying and building at the same time.
So are we going to do the same 3 minutes per person, and we'll alternate back, and we only have one member of the public here. So I guess last time we started with the people online. Maybe this time we can start with the one person in the room. Steve, you're up.
I will let the online people go first.
Okay, I'm going to look for hands online, or if you.
I noted that for quite a while, Steve Huffaker's hand was up while we were having the discussion of CUDs.
Is Steve still?
Yep.
Steve, if you're still there? Okay.
I'm still here. Thank you for remembering me. There seems to be, what I'm hearing anyhow, is the sense that VCBB is going to just proceed with the notion of pre-purchasing and warehousing materials. And I would just, I wrote this in a letter to Christine a week ago, and I just want to kind of ask that you be careful about that. There's lots of pitfalls. There's lots of reasons that it's going to do nothing but insert delay and diminish accountability. So I just actually wrote a list. I didn't think I was going to be on the line here, but how do we handle changes in orders? How do we handle overages? How do we handle returns? Advanced provisioning. How do you make sure you have enough product when you need it? What happens if you're coming up short, and then you're leaving your CUD without product. So in general, my recommendation is not to do it and to leave pre-provisioning to the CUD. Now, that's certainly counter to the sentiment that's been expressed by some of the CUDs, and certainly we need to kind of, or I would encourage you to do your diligence. The one thing that had occurred to me that could be of great value would be, if it's possible, to identify a standard suite of hardware. So you've been talking about a standard suite of strand counts for cables, but what if we all said we're going to go with a standard 10 gig OLT, ONT, and then you negotiate with the manufacturer for reduced pricing, and then we then, as the CUDs, can take advantage of that as appropriate. So that seems to be less risky than assuming the responsibility of being a distributor, which is surprisingly complex and riddled with potential challenges, even when a distributor is, even if you were to outsource the work to a distributor. So please be mindful of it. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So going back to the room. Mr. Whitaker?
I said I'll wait till your online people are done.
Okay. Next, I think we have David Jones is the next hand that I see.
Yes, thank you, Rob. Doing my best to get my camera going. In the discussion of the RFP that was just held, I believe I saw a provision that only amounts to be spent in the next 6 months would be should be included in the amounts that we would apply for. What we are hoping to do is sign an agreement for engineering and pre-construction tasks, some of which, because we have more than one phase, will extend beyond 6 months. And in order to sign that contract, we need a funding commitment. We cannot sign a contract if we don't have a commitment for the funds. So I would make the suggestion that although the idea of gating the funds or awarding them in stages, for fiscal management, that could be a workable idea. There should be a larger total that is part of the grant application and for which we can get approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on the calls? Anybody else on the call that would like to speak? Okay. At that point, I guess we are back to the room here. Be a little more flexible than the 2 minutes.
Steve Whitaker, Montpelier. I encourage you as an urgent matter to get your contracted or hired counsel to interpret Act 71 for you, not just rely on Ledge Council's interpretation. I think that there's some real complex areas of accountability that need to be guiding the decisions you're about to make, especially with regards to interoperability, resilience. I do believe Senator Bray phrased it as, in the event of failure of a CUD, mergers and acquisitions without losing dial tone, so to speak. It's important to repeatedly emphasize that the services that you're proposing to fund the building of are going to be voice services and become 911 subject to 911 outage reporting rules. So the resilience imperative is way up the scale beyond anything that I'm hearing from any CUD anywhere. And when I did a public records request to BC Fiber, they had no records whatsoever of their resilience plans. So this is why I'm arguing that the statewide design and engineering is crucial, because that would give you something to measure the CUD's plans for and actually relieve some of the load from the CUDs. And the analogy I use is you're awarding 12 different contracts or 8 different contracts for puzzle makers. And all those puzzles are supposed to fit into a statewide puzzle, but there's no template for what the statewide puzzle is. So I caution and argue that you really should look at the Huntsville model, the St. Louis model, talk to the folks who do that kind of work. But I also need to revert back and call your attention to the statutory goals of 202C. There's no notwithstanding clause in this bill, which means that, and I've spoken to the auditor of accounts about this, this body is still bound by the statutory policies of 202C. And that's where competition, competitive choice for subscribers, open access for competitive providers, and ubiquitous mobile wireless are all statutory goals. And those need to be in effect, what you're doing is you're funding the creation of regional telecommunications plan in the absence of a credible or complete state telecom plan. And all those plans have to address competition. And no one wants to talk about it, but it's been a statutory goal for decades. And we can't afford to build a bunch of passive networks that it's impossible to allow a competitor on. Active fiber isn't one of the first questions you should pose to your statewide engineering contractor is, does it merit pushing for active fiber where a competitor can serve any particular customer because there's a fiber home run to every building? And just by simply moving an Ethernet cable at the central office. So I know I'm going to move. Another urgent is to workforce training. Above all else, you need to come up with a plan and seed funding to Vermont Technical College to get these programs started so that you've got some staff to hire, or these contractors do, next spring. Consolidated has hired more than all of the Eustis capacity. And a lot of those folks from Florida and Texas and Louisiana are going to go fly south for the winter. So that's going to be a real bottleneck in this. When you're talking about baseline, I guess since I don't get to comment later, the FCC, the infrastructure bill that as of a week ago, does reference a new data standard. It's still data supplied by the existing. Comcast will be representing where they're serving 120 is the threshold. And any place they claim to be able to offer 120 is going to be ineligible for that 100 million that's coming as the small state minimum next year. So we're going to have 2 different grant source funds with different requirements. The ARPA that we have now and the infrastructure bill. Also keep in mind that this is the way you're going about it currently is the most inefficient way, because we're not addressing cellular, we're not addressing public safety grade telecommunications for radio towers, and you would have experience in this with your radio network. The regional public safety agencies need to upgrade their radio communications, and that requires redundant public safety grade fiber to every tower and transmitter. And that is a key revenue source for these CUDs if they're to be sustainable. If we turn our backs on that, we're further making the CUDs unsustainable. Also, the cable served addresses. Is this the protect cable monopolies strategy? Or I know that the Act 71 only defines served and unserved as eligible for this funding and for the universal service plans, but the statutory goal is fiber speed to every address in the state by 2024. So if we're going to have to go back and piece together yet another design and this body has no responsibility for it, that is the least efficient way to proceed.
So Steve, we're at 6 minutes. And
yeah, please
wrap it up. Thank you.
You're not the chair.
Being generous. I'm just letting you know where we're at.
The chair will interrupt me when she sees fit.
We'll give you 1 more minute. Thank you.
Well, I'll ask for time on your agenda because I can't, it's efficient to me or you to try to take my insights and decades of study on this topic into 3-minute slots.
Okay, thank you.
We also do welcome stuff in writing. We get a lot of, that's what we're asking people, just there's a lot for everybody to process.
Exactly.
Actually, may I make a comment to this? It would be more likely that we could integrate some of your observations if we receive them in writing so that we can check back and refer not just what our notes say, but what you intended that we hear. The second thing I would ask you to consider in your public comments, Mr. Whitaker, is if you could keep them within the scope of Act 71, which cell phone and mobility is not, it would help us because it will help us focus on what we need to get done here. If you take issue with Act 71 and its scope, I ask you to address that to the legislature. That would help me.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move along to meeting schedule followed up by executive session. So we have a lot to accomplish in a short period of time, and we're going to have to be pushing to basically meet these the rollout of the grants. Rob is out next week.
Yes.
Good, we can catch up.
Good, I can try to get some sleep.
Question.
Yes.
So just to throw this out here, it may be a horrible suggestion. It seems like there's a lot here. Is there, so meeting in person for decisions, is there an opportunity for us to meet in between in-person meetings just to catch up? Like not for decision making, but just to get briefs? I wonder if that's
Still
something
has to
that's
be a
possible.
public meeting.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, I'm just going to throw out that we're all juggling both work schedules and representation on this board, so it is going to be difficult to coordinate meetings. I'm just going to put that out.
Yeah.
You know, we have all got, as Rob is doing, juggling 1,000 things at once.
Yeah.
So, but Madam Chair, wouldn't it be true that if less than a quorum of us, so that would be less than 3, want to meet to talk about issues and ask questions of one another, that is acceptable, right? To help us get informed and be ready to participate. Because I do think there are times when some of these questions, I have a million questions I could ask you, Laura, about what did you think about the intent of the legislation in this regard? And we could get square without taking up the entire board's time.
Yeah. Or you can maybe get educated between 2 people at a time, but we still have to come back around.
Absolutely.
Not everybody's going to have that wealth of information.
That's right.
Yeah, I would make myself available for those.
Great, great.
Are we thinking we should meet weekly for the next couple months?
Will we get enough done in between, and will we drive the
That's a good
staff
question.
insane?
That's a good question.
To put that out there, once we get more staff, it'll be a little bit easier to do this, and that is quite the process with the state. So on one hand, I encourage us to meet as often as possible, but recognizing that it is intense trying to turn around and get you materials in advance that quickly.
But I'm thinking right now, you've prepared information for us today that we didn't even get to.
Yeah.
So we already have a stockpile.
We can have a whole nother meeting on what we.
But you don't have to do anything.
Oh, we're not staying all day?
But we could have a whole other meeting just dealing with the baseline stuff and talking just about this RFP document. Those 2 and staffing, whole meeting right there. That no more further backdrop information, I think, has to be done. That's my.
I'm willing to meet. I'm the least of your concerns because I have the most flexible schedule. So I'll just say I would be willing to meet to catch up on some of these baseline things for a while. I'm hoping that we're not going to be meeting weekly for 4 or 5 years, but
I don't think 4 or 5 years, but probably a couple of months is my guess.
Through the end of the
year.
year.
Require once a week or at least every other week.
Yeah.
That's kind of my headset at this point. And the more that we can fit in, the better. So next week with Rob out, we can use that as a break to catch up because we have plenty to read and review. The week of the 23rd, I'm actually at a conference that I have to go to because I'm chairing some stuff here at this conference. I will be back in the state on Thursday and Friday, 26th and 27th.
So the only thing I would ask if we move to weeklies is just that we try and pick a consistent day time.
Yeah, every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thursdays are reasonable for me. Tuesdays I have standing meetings. Wednesdays tend not to be great. Thursdays I can.
Thursday mornings would be okay for me. I have to
Okay.
be in Brattleboro at 3.
I can do Thursday mornings.
I can make Thursday mornings work.
I can do 8:30 to noon.
Okay.
If possible, starting a little bit later because of the daycare challenges. I know we have that. That would be more helpful for me, or I could just participate remotely. It's fine either. It's fine either way.
Does 8:30 work, or is 9 o'clock better?
9 o'clock would be better.
And maybe what we plan to do is we go from 9 to 1. Bring lunch. Bring something so that we can make it a working lunch right through, and we all are self-sufficient.
I have another board meeting that starts at 2 on Thursday, so I will be exiting promptly.
Thursday the 26th.
I'm putting it in for Thursday, 9 to 1 for the foreseeable future. Is that what we're doing?
So
I'm gonna check one thing, and if we should talk about meeting location, but if we're here, I'm gonna see if I can book the Giga room, the much larger room for us. Now, but that's the.
Are you sure that we shouldn't meet next week, given that we have so much holdover? I mean,
If I
can we
need to,
meet
if I need to
without
call,
Rob?
if I need to call in for a little bit, I can, but
I think,
I think we could do
It's
it
time to
without
nap
you.
yeah, we could test your executive director.
Try Thursday.
I can't meet Thursday.
Oh, I thought that was the 19th?
The
No,
19th. I have
Okay.
a freestanding.
okay.
So we're going to start on
The 26th?
26th.
But again, I'd be glad to meet with individual board members of 2 at a time. Well, just to get them to speed, so.
9 to 1, we said. Let's find out if what Giga has to say for at least the first meeting.
I particularly want to pick your brain, Holly, from, and maybe it's you two together, to know, you know, the counter some of you, to know the possibilities.
Okay. I'm good at brainstorming possibilities. I'm not sure what.
Well, I just worried, you know, I get one interpretation from the department in terms of what the legislation says. I'm curious to get your opinion as well.
We may make a legal opinion too. I would not be that.
Well, then I think follow up legal opinion.
I think there's enough room in a lot of this that it's probably good for us to make a decision about what we'd like to do, what we
Yeah.
think we can do, what we'd like to do,
Yeah.
and then kind of
Socialize it.
see
Then see if we
pushback,
can-
and if we get pushback, then we, you know,
I agree.
So Giga is booked for the 26th, exactly the time we want to meet. It's more, I'm gonna have to try to book far in advance
I think
For a
the
lot of
only
these-
two rooms is Mega and Giga.
that have this system.
Well, I
That's the
heard
challenge.
yesterday. that
I will have a
pavilion-
change of schedule October, that Thursday morning will not work. This will be good for a while, but I can't do it long-term once we hit October, late October through the end of the year.
So
Hopefully we'll be
let's
on our
just-
way by then.
Is it booked every week?
It is not, so I'm gonna immediately book for the next Thursday.
And the next one, and the
And
next
just have
one,
it as a
and-
weekly thing to try to do
And I will-
that and
I will reach out to the
wait
pavilion
until I hear
across the
from
street,
everybody
see if
else.
we can better meet.
Okay, well, it is what it is.
I mean, this
Ask about the State House rooms.
state house rooms aren't available to non-legislative bodies.
Let me get that one. I'm gonna try to make this repeating.
What about going up to National Life?
National Life Works, because they require a proof of vaccination.
I think that's fine.
No problem.
Okay. I'll schedule National.
So
Life.
just want to put that out there, so we don't put this as we will meet forever Thursday mornings, because I will have to make a schedule change, because I can't do this. So things happening in my future that change.
can we ask for that to be just tagged back in September, that we revisit this discussion and
Yes.
an agenda item?
So for now, should I book Giga through the 28th, or do we
And,
want to?
and subject to change.
October 28th, subject to change, so I will do that, and
Thank you.
I've accepted for, gonna get about 1,000 emails here, but we have to figure out for the meeting on the 26th or 27th.
I'll take care of that.
Okay.
Do we have a motion to go into executive session for personnel?
And I'd like,
So moved.
All right,
second,
okay. It is 12:18. We're going to move into executive session.
Okay,
So if you will,
so let me pause this. I don't know how to actually.
Well, if we're gonna,
Is this the end of the agenda? Well, we need to come back to.
we need to come back and ratify. We will need to come back and close the
Okay.
meeting.
So I'm gonna stop recording. I don't know how to I guess if we mute the meeting, but then people are seeing us. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with how to do this.
If you're not taking any action, you just disconnect it.
Yeah, can we just end the public portion of the meeting and then we'll go to executive session?
I think we have to make a motion to adjourn though,
Publicly.
publicly.
Yeah, we do.
We
yeah.
Can you mute?
yeah,
us?
well,
You can disconnect and come back.
Yeah, I guess I can,
How do you notify
How would-
people?
how-
to do
how would
that?
it-
that's the thing.
I've never tried this
There's a
before, but
chat room.
what if we,
There's
You
a
can say-
break, there is a breakout room function.
we could terminate the camera for the time being?
yeah, turn the camera and mute.
Zoom, you put
I think the
everybody on.
camera,
Oh.
visual's fine. It's the
The other thing,
audio.
the other thing we could do
Yeah, we
is
got
make
masks
a,
on, they
make
can't
a
hear us.
motion we could make a motion to, end the meeting at 1:00 and, just be done then.
Is that,
That's not.
You do need a
It's
formal
probably
resolution.
not, that doesn't, is that
That's
not good?
procedure.
well, we-
Not good.
Can we mute and turn the camera off?
I can turn the camera off and mute, and all we're doing at the end is just adjourning, but
For everyone.
for everyone's knowledge, but I'm gonna stop the recording now, and then I'm gonna mute and turn off everything here. Stop recording.